Okay, good morning everybody. So welcome to the May 2021 board meeting of the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency held in public, or the MHRA as we prefer to call it. My name is Stephen Lightfoot and I'm the chair of the board, and my role today is to lead us through today's agenda. Now, for those of you who've not attended one of our meetings before, I must start by saying that this is a board meeting held in public and it is not a public meeting. It's also important to explain that the role of this particular board is to provide the strategic leadership to the agency and it's not to make individual regulatory decisions on specific products, because that's quite ably done by the officials within the agency and our independent expert advisory committees. I also need to make you aware that we're recording this particular meeting so that we can publish the recording on our websites to give as many people as possible the opportunity to see the work that we do. Now, I'm delighted that 33 people have actually registered to observe today's meeting. We've got 11 people representing patients or patient groups, and we've got 14 members of our staff. So thank you to each and every one of you for joining us today. Now, as always, our agenda is based around our strategic objectives and the strategic objectives listed out in our delivery plan. So we've got papers today on scientific innovation, on patient safety, on communications, and also on financial sustainability. And I'll refer to the numbers in the board packs as we go through the meeting, just to help steer us through the agenda. Now, as the board works through the agenda, members of the audience can in fact ask questions through the chat function on Zoom. And at the end of the meeting, our Director of Communications, Rachel Bosworth, will actually collate all of those questions and we'll answer as many of them as we possibly can. We've set aside 30 minutes for a Q&A session at the end, and we'll try and get through as many of those questions as we possibly can, because this is an important opportunity to engage with members of the public. So Rachel, just so everybody knows who you are, can you give us a wave? Just to, that's Rachel. So Rachel will be the person who'll be asking the questions on your behalf. I'd also like to take the opportunity to introduce our other board colleagues. So first of all, can I just ask Dr. June Rain to give us a wave? June's our Chief Executive. Dr. Sam Atkinson, who's our Chief Access and Quality Officer. We've got John Fundry, our Chief Operating Officer. John Quinn, our Chief Technology Officer. Dr. Christian Schneider, our Chief Scientific Officer. And then we've also got our independent non-executive directors. So we've got Dr. Barbara Bannister. Give us a wave, Barbara. Thank you. We've got Mandy Calvert. We've got Professor Bruce Campbell. We've got Mercy Jessingham. We've got Anthony Rogers. We've got Professor David Webb.
Good morning. And
we've got Michael Whitehouse.
Morning.
We're also joined on screen today by a number of other guests. So we've got Catherine Glover, who's the Deputy Director for Medicines Regulation and Prescribing at the Department of Health. Thank you for joining us, Catherine. We've got Leah Pickup, who's joining us from and representing the Government Legal Department, as Fleur Ruder couldn't be here today. We've got Kathy Harrison, our Chief Pharmaceutical Officer from Northern Ireland. Nice to have you here, Kathy. And we've also got Alison Strath, the Chief Pharmaceutical Officer from Scotland. So nice to see you again, Alison. And then we've got Carly McGurry, our newly appointed Director of Governance. We've got Natalie Richards, who's our Head of Directorate and who will be taking the minutes for us today. And then last but by no means least, we've also got Jude, Claudine, Sash and Patrick working behind the scenes to make the meeting happen. So I think from my point of view, that's the introductions complete. Can I just check if I've missed anything from anybody? There's certainly no intention to miss anybody. Okay, that's great. So that being the case then, so that's sort of really how the meeting will run. We'll work our way through the agenda and we'll then take the Q&A at the end from members of the public. So can I just first of all check if there are any apologies for absence? I know I've had apologies from Greg Chalmers and also Fleur Ruder from the Government Legal Department, but I think everyone else is complete as far as I'm aware. So in terms of declarations of interest, Bruce, I think you had a couple of declarations you wanted to make us aware of.
Indeed, as usual, I have declarations about giving advice to commercial companies about their medical devices, two of them. The first is a company called Saluda Medical, to whom I've offered some initial advice about generation and publication of evidence on their ultrasound system for renal artery denervation to treat resistant hypertension. I've been told that I'll be paid for that in any future work, but I've yet to receive any formal agreement. The second relates to a company called Visible Analytics regarding their FibroScan device used in assessing liver fibrosis and cirrhosis. They've asked me for advice about presenting a case to NICE. My contract for this will be through the International Innovation House. And again, I've received some payment for this work, but I've yet to enter into any formal agreement.
Great. Okay, thank you, Bruce. Appreciate that. Were there any other declarations of interest we need to be able to note? No? Okay. Oh, thank you. Well, thank you for that, Bruce. Much appreciated. So if we just move straight on to the minutes of the last meeting, that's on page 2 of the board pack. Can I just first of all check if there are any questions of accuracy? I'm not seeing any comments. So on that basis, Natalie, can we therefore record that, those minutes as a true record of the last meeting? If we just move on to page 6 and just look specifically at the actions that were then resulting from that meeting and previous meetings too, and just focus on the meeting on the actions that were due. So action number 21 is actually on the agenda, so we'll cover that today. Action 28 is also can be covered on the agenda, and action 30 is also on the agenda. As I look through it in terms of the actions from the last meeting, action 32, the balanced scorecard is on the agenda, but John, I just wonder whether you could just maybe give us a verbal update on where we are with the publication and engagement plans for the delivery plan.
So currently, Stephen, the delivery plan, we've got completed a kind of branded version for engagement with stakeholders, and we have a detailed plan for June, and EXCO engagement with a wide range of stakeholders. We also need ministerial approval, and that will be secured shortly to proceed. So basically, we're just about ready to go with it.
Excellent. And I think one thing we're planning to do is absolutely to send ministers in the devolved administrations a copy of the delivery plan and an opportunity to talk about it well if they want. So just for Alison and Kathy's benefit as well, we want to continue the engagement that we've already started with the devolved administrations.
You will be doing that in parallel with our minister, Stephen.
Exactly. The other action was then action 34. There was a question in the Q&A session last time, June, on the life sciences sector deal. I just wondered if you could give us an update on that, please.
Well, thank you, Stephen. Yes, the question was specifically about a new regulatory pathway for genomic medicines. And as I said at the time, the COVID pandemic work had meant that pathway was a bit delayed, but I'm pleased to say there will be a paper by September that's being worked through at the level of the International Coalition of Medicines Regulators. But of course, with our ILAP pathway, Innovative Licensing and Access pathway now open, we're actually seeing some. So both the strategy, but actually the action are well in hand.
Good. Okay, thank you for that, June. And also the action number 35, there was a specific question from the member of public who came on screen and asked the question. Can I just check that we've given him a full and comprehensive answer?
Yes, this was about being able to have 2 cancer drugs appropriate to Mr. Shelton's condition. And yes, we've made the appropriate linkages, and clearly NICE as our partner will be key to this, and he's being kept fully in the picture.
Great. Okay, so I think on that basis we can close the action 35, and then action 34 looks like we're going to be able to come back in September on that particular point. Okay, were there any other matters arising from the actions or the minutes of the last meeting? No? Okay, well, thank you very much for that. So let's move on to the first substantive item of the agenda, which is on the current context, and it's what are the current key issues from the Chief Executive's point of view. So June, over to you.
Well, thank you again, Stephen. And the report does bring together our main areas of focus, and I think it clearly shows what a busy time it is for the agency with the priorities we have at the moment. So as it's a quite lengthy report, I'll just highlight 3 main aspects. And the first message, of course, is that our focus on access, healthcare access and patient access remains an absolutely top priority, particularly in relation to COVID-19. With all the concern about the variants, I'd like to highlight that our scientific and regulatory experts are engaging with companies who are planning to update their vaccines, the vaccines that would be designed for the novel variants, although thankfully the ones we have at the moment are largely pretty effective against the variants so far. We're also looking ahead to the imminent availability of a single dose vaccine that may well be of high relevance in some areas, that it's a one shot rather than having to come back for two. And NIBS has completed the technical transfer, so the batch testing, as soon as approval's given, can move ahead. And I think we all want to thank NIBS for the amazing work on batch testing. I think it's up to 68.5 million doses at the time this report was given, well ahead of deployment, but always good to keep ahead of the game there. On the testing side, our work with test and trace is really important to confidence that the particularly lateral flow tests have good substantial evidence of their accuracy. So we're feeding well into the work that the NHS is doing there. On a separate theme, our partnership with the FDA Orbis has delivered just recently a new drug for lung cancer, and that's another important step because it's likely to be several months ahead of European approval. So access, a really key area for us. Second area, of course, is safety. And as we always say, it's our prime concern. The intensive monitoring of the vaccines, COVID-19 vaccines, continues. And every week, we're very transparent about all the reports of suspected side effects. But most recently, we were pleased to confirm, on the basis of expert advice, benefit risk of the AZ vaccine remains favourable, although there are some variations depending on age. Very favourable, particularly for older populations. On the devices side, we've also sent out some targeted information where there was a question about sterilisation of some parenteral nutrition kit. It's that kind of thing that makes sure that not only is the advice there, which that there wasn't especially significant risk, but there were alternatives for healthcare. Finally, our staff deserve a real pat on the back because our ability to deliver depends on staff. Our transformation programme is ongoing. It's gaining pace as the design details are developed. And as you said, Stephen, the roadmap in the delivery plan is now in possession of every member of staff who are agreeing their goals for the coming year, particularly. But I'd like to highlight an important aspect, which is our culture change. And good news yesterday, our values and behaviours work, which Comms has led, but with around 800 staff involved, has been shortlisted for the annual awards, 2 awards of the Chartered Institute of Public Relations. So I knew the board would like to know that. It's a really good piece of news that work that everyone contributed to is being given that kind of national accolade, the Oscars of the communications world. So intensive work on access, patient safety, always front of mind, and a big thank you to staff for doing all of the above and engaging in our transformation progress. So thank you there, and really happy to take questions.
Well, that's great, June. Well, thank you very much. I think, as always, I continue to be impressed by the breadth and the depth of the activities within the agency. So thank you to you, but also, more importantly, thank you to all our staff as well for all the work that they're doing. So I've got some questions. Mercy, why don't you start us off?
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to welcome this patient involvement pilot for devices clinical investigations. And I've also noted that clinical trials unit work as well about patient kind of involvement. So my question really is about the coordination of feedback into the patient and public involvement team, and how's that done? Because it's really important that we learn across the whole organisation, especially where kind of new ways of working and involving patients and the public are involved. So I really wanted to know about that, you know, how that coordination is going to happen, how that information is spread across the agency. And the other point, just on the drug safety update bulletin, really glad it got nice accreditation. So as far as I know, accreditation with NICE involves a lot of lay and stakeholder input and input from the public and patients. So just to highlight that, because I don't think that comes out. So it's great that we've got accreditation, but it would be nice to kind of open up that black box a bit and actually tell people how much public and stakeholder engagement is involved in that accreditation. Thanks.
Okay. June, do you want to respond to that?
Yes, really, really helpful points. And as chair of our Patient Safety and Engagement Committee, well, thank you, Mercy, for really, really pushing us there. In terms of the pilots, this flows really from highlighting in our delivery plan and the work leading up to it, how everyone is thinking about bringing in that vital perspective from patients and the public. And so the devices pilot with clinical investigations is underway. Also on the medicines licensing side, and Sam might want to speak about that in a minute or two, but importantly, the innovative licensing and access pathway has a toolkit that actually helps people get to grips with how best to do it. Your question, of course, is the key one. How do we build on the distillation of the knowledge that we gain? And that's something I have to say I'd like to come and discuss at PSEC, at Patient Safety and Engagement Committee, because that's where it really will all come together, particularly as we look to making a meaningful impact in the area of trials and investigation, patient-reported outcome measures, how patients want to see a protocol design, and how patients are, if you like, having a view should issues arise during the course of a trial. So it's quite a pervasive, holistic input from patients, and let's bring all the learnings together so that everyone can benefit. At our last all-staff meeting, we were asking for some stories about this. So I think sometimes it's not just collated information, it's stories that will help everybody realise every member of staff has a part to play. I'll quickly touch on drug safety update. And although it sounds perhaps process orientated, we really value the NICE accreditation system. As you say, it's not only how we build evidence to give advice, it's the perspectives of lay, of patient, and other perspectives that make it really robust. So thank you for that. And I'll suggest to the team, they might write tonight an article that we will publish about how that worked and what difference it made. So Stephen, if that's okay, I might, through you, say Sam might want to add on the involvement in the medicine side, or even devices too.
Okay, Sam, would you like to add anything to that?
Thanks very much, Chair. Thanks, June. So yeah, I guess just from a sort of practical perspective, just to give a little bit more and to build on what June was saying. So from both the medicines and the devices side, we are doing pilots, running pilots for patient involvement. It's very much around gathering data, identifying where the gaps are in terms of our knowledge. It's very much at this stage probably quite informal because it is that information gathering. There's no requirements on industry at the moment to supply it. So it's very much a voluntary working with us to really understand what's already happening. And we know just from some of the early conversations that industry and the companies actually have a huge amount of patient engagement. It's just that we as a regulator don't always see that. So what we're trying to do is understand how we can get more visibility of this information, this engagement that's already going on, to baseline it, to understand the impact on decisions, and through the pathway how it actually how it impacts all of that too. So from a medicines perspective, we've got a proactive approach happening at the point of marketing authorization application, where we're actually selecting individual companies in the applications to ask them what they're doing around patient engagement. And we've had, I think, probably half a dozen or so, somewhere around that, for those particular companies that we've engaged with so far, but it's only been running since the 23rd of March. We've also got some work ongoing with CTU, where they're also assessing the patient engagement at the CTU application point, to really, again, see where the gaps are. And then from a devices perspective too, this is, again, another voluntary activity, really to understand how patient engagement and involvement is actually occurring along the medical device development process, and really highlighting that to us for future activities and processes that we'll put in place. So it's a work in progress, but it's quite an exciting area, I think, at this point in time, that really will lead to some positive changes going forwards.
You see, I think that's great, because we obviously talked about patient and public engagement at the last board meeting, and this is, just real good examples of how this is starting to, come to life. And I think the examples and the stories, as June describes it, really do bring it to life. So I think it's clearly work in progress. Mercy, keep everybody honest, please, through the Patient Safety and Engagement Committee, because I think it's really important that we progress this agenda at pace. So, okay, maybe we can move topics now. And David, can I bring you into the conversation?
Yeah, thank you very much. So first of all, I'd like to congratulate June and colleagues on their work, across the spectrum: batch testing, trials, vaccines, test and trace. I mean, it's really very impressive. So yeah, well done everyone in the organisation. I had two really simple questions. In item 3, there's talk about requests from national control agencies for contract testing. I wondered, does that mean international national agencies, and therefore is that a new income stream potentially for NIBS? That's the first question. And the second question is, I kind of thought we were looking to join the International Committee of Medicines Regulatory Agencies, and looking at their website when I read your piece, it looks like we are a member. Did I miss that, or is that new, or is that something we've been part of for a while now?
Okay, June, a couple of questions there.
Yes, and maybe to start by thanking David, because the thanks that you've expressed will really motivate everyone, and really glad to have that. On the International Coalition of Medicines Regulatory Authorities, indeed, we helped to get that off the ground, and my goodness, it has stepped up to the plate during COVID. It's now under the chairmanship of the European agency, but we're very strongly in support and introducing some of the agilities that we pioneered during COVID that way. What we are trying to join is the International Conference on Harmonisation and the IMDRF, the International Medical Device Regulatory Forum. So there is a couple of the agencies, the international authorities, that we want to be part of as a solo regulator, but we are observers. So don't worry, our voice will be heard, and my goodness, we're able to use that voice. In terms of the important role that NIBS is doing in terms of national control laboratories, Stephen, my understanding that is countries, because of the amazing outreach of NIBS. But I'm sure if you'd like to invite Christian to come in, there may be some important examples there.
Yeah, Christian, could you just add a little bit more colour to that answer?
Thanks, indeed. So indeed, these are other national authorities which, in their capacity to release batches, ask NIBS for help. These can be worldwide. Like, for example, we had one from Botswana or Israel. And indeed, to come back to David's question, this is a possibility to create income.
Excellent. So I think there we have a science and income. I like the two going together, Christian. So,
and maybe even one further addition, the real role would be as a national reference authority for the WHO. So we're working in all those fora to be able to not just exploit, but offer other countries the advantage of the robust science that NIBS undertakes.
Yeah, I think both of those questions actually show the international scope of our work, which is really important, actually. So thank you for that. Okay, Mandy, you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Sort of building on that theme a little bit about the sort of international nature, I noticed the work done with the Janssen vaccine around utilising data from other agencies, and similarly with Orbis. This was an item we highlighted in ARAC, which we saw as a risk in terms of access to data going forward. I wonder if you'd like to just comment a little bit further on how we're using and collaborating to get data to enable us to accelerate healthcare access, and also, very importantly, with patient safety.
Okay, June?
A really vital concern, and the fact that ARAC has homed in on that, we really welcome. Our international collaborations and the leadership we've given on safety, on vigilance, particularly for COVID, has enabled us to see data in real time. So when you talk about, or we raise the issue of the Janssen CLAG vaccine, we've been very closely involved with all the decisions the USA made, and I watched that safety profile developing in clinical use, which is an incredibly useful thing to have before we get to the approval timeline ourselves, which, as I said earlier, is very imminent. In terms of Orbis, this is a different kind of working because we're starting pre-market and working hand in hand with the other regulatory authorities who are part of Orbis to develop that understanding of safety and efficacy together. So it's a different model, but again, very close and open sharing of information. The broader issue of data access is under review all the time, either through WHO or through other linkages. And colleagues may have thought, how well do we relate with Europe? And I can say very well. We have a very close relationship on data exchange there. So as active participants in safety monitoring, we find it vital that we have those relationships in place so that when there is a new product, our decisions are made on the basis of everything that's known.
Okay, well, thank you, June. I think it is important that for UK patients to continue to benefit from new treatments, there is going to be sometimes, on some situations, a reliance on other regulatory authorities' decision making, and that's a key part of our new proposition. The trick is to make sure that we absolutely get the safety data we need to be able to monitor that effectively. And as we'll see in Michael's paper later in this particular board meeting, there's going to be a joint working between the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee, ARAC as we call it, and the Patient Safety and Engagement Committee to do a deep dive specifically into that very question. So I think from a governance point of view and an assurance point of view, it's important that the board gets the information, but it needs to be done at a more detailed level than probably this board meeting can do. And then we'll rely on assurance reports from the two committee chairs to come back to us on that. But I think it's something we need to continue to monitor quite carefully, June, is what I would suggest.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Were there any other questions on June's incredibly comprehensive report? Barbara.
I just wanted to say, I know that the MHRA has been participating in projects to help people in emerging economies to set up their own systems for patient safety. And has COVID interfered with this? So have you been able to continue that work during the COVID epidemic? I'm thinking particularly of African and Asian countries who've been seeking to improve their drug safety knowledge and activities.
June?
Thank you. We have looked at COVID and access to vaccines, therapeutics and devices as an opportunity to build on the groundwork we have done through initiatives such as the Gates funded Smart Safety Surveillance. And that, of course, had led to work at the level of the African Union to look at the African Union system as a whole. So we've built on that, and it may interest colleagues to know that we have weekly signal detection with Ghana, Nigeria, Ethiopia and South Africa as COVAX enables countries to deploy vaccines. So with the huge energy behind this, and it's not just one way, it's two-way energy, that has built on the groundwork that was done. I'd like to say a big thank you in a way to use this to say for the funders who thought so well ahead to establishing the groundwork that then when something like COVID comes along, you're in a really good position to build on it. And we wouldn't be, I think, saying to these countries, you can introduce AZ or whichever vaccine COVAX has given you with confidence without a real-time safety system. So just quickly, Ghana does their signal detection using our database of vaccines as the baseline. So it's a very, very constructive and almost evolutionary approach to what was put in place. So it is working, and it's really there to build even more from, build even better.
Thank you.
So I'm sort of hearing there that there's not been a delay. In fact, actually, in some ways, it's almost accelerated. And I know that the African countries, and I mentioned in the Patient Safety Connect paper, which we're going to talk about shortly as well. And I think we're developing an international strategy where we need to just identify what other initiatives we can support. Sam, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I just thought it might be worth just touching on the international work from sort of a wider perspective than just the safety, which Barbara was referring to. We do actually work obviously through the International Coalition of Medicines Regulatory Authorities that was referred to earlier on a number of different projects which are quite broad in nature, and in obviously June's report it talks around the digital inspections and that sort of thing. So we are still using these mechanisms to actually try and upskill and support and the like some of our counterparts, and working very closely with the likes of India and such, even through other routes like educational mechanisms through presentations, which we can still do obviously via the internet as we are now at the moment. So there are different mechanisms I think that we're still trying to utilize, and COVID has definitely sort of shone a light on doing things differently, I would say, but it's still a positive interaction, and the ICMHRA activities are definitely really driving forward that collaboration internationally.
Correct. Okay, well, I think we'll be having a paper on our international strategy in a couple of months actually, so I think it'll be a really good opportunity to explore that in further detail at that point. Okay, so I think we'll close this particular topic. So June, just would like to say thank you again to you and the team. I think, Natalie, if we can just note this report with thanks, that would be great. And then we'll maybe move on to the next topic, which is around our balanced scorecard. So that's on page 15 of the board pack. This is something that's been in gestation for a little while. John, do you want to say some introductory comments, and then we can maybe go to questions?
Thanks, Stephen. Yes, as you said, regular attendees will know we have been working for some time on the balanced scorecard in order to track the agency's performance and measure progress against our delivery plan. The current version that the paper covers has been approved by our Executive Committee and Delivery Performance Committee, and with an express view that we should stop tinkering with it and start using it in anger. Those that have seen it previously will know that it reflects the 6 themes of our delivery plan: enabling innovation, accelerating access, and ensuring patient safety, supported by involving patients and public, dynamic organisation, and financial sustainability. At the risk of calling them 6 quadrants, those are the elements of the balanced scorecard. How frequently we produce the scorecard is mainly driven by the availability of the data. So we can produce page 1 that you see in the paper, which focuses on accelerating access and ensuring patient safety every month, as well as data on things like clinical trials, our operating surplus or deficit, cash position, as well as staff numbers. Page 2 would then really be produced every quarter. So we suggest that would be the cycle that we start to use it in. We're undertaking a gap analysis of the balanced scorecard against our delivery plan. So we'll be supplementing the balanced scorecard with additional measures once we've finalised that review. Finally, I think it's just worth saying a lot of work has gone into this by people across the agency. I'd like to compliment the work of that team, because I think actually it is a good product and should help us considerably over the next few years. And I just like the board's views on basically how we can use the scorecard going forward.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you, John. Yeah, I think certainly there's a huge amount of work going into this, and what's important is actually we're trying to get new, more outcome-focused measures. Yeah, we've not completely got there on everything yet, but I think that's absolutely the direction of travel. There's no doubt about that. I think in terms of just using our time effectively today, can I suggest that we focus on the content rather than the presentation, because we can all have views about the colours or the size of the charts and so forth. But I think we'll allow John and the team to work on the presentation of that to make it clearly legible. But so if we can focus particularly on the content, and maybe Michael, if I can just bring you in first, because I know you've had some initial contacts and thoughts involved in this.
Yeah, Stephen, thank you. Just to say to start with, I think this is an excellent piece of work, and generally pay tribute to everything that everybody's done. This is not easy to take forward. So I would echo what John had said. I agree also that we need to start using it. My question, well, I've got two observations and then a question. I think it's important that the really good balanced scorecards are not just a scorecard on its own. It's the narrative that I presume that John would provide every month that would help the board interpret this. So I think that narrative is important. I also think it's important that we aim to link this as best as we can to the risk register. So as this tells us things, we need to be confident that it does translate through into other assurance mechanisms that exist within the organisation. My only question really is around ensuring patient safety. If you look at the way this is presented in terms of content, it identifies where things are, information is beginning to tell us there might be an issue. And I think that's the first three indicators. The final indicator is about patient safety interventions. And it's this whole thing about a closed loop. It's the assurance that the board would get in the future that where we have got negative signs, those are being resolved within a reasonable timescale. It's an incredibly difficult one, and it may be that June and John want to deal with that through the narrative, but I think that's an important area of assurance that the board should get, that where information shows something bad is happening or potentially difficult, how confident are we that it's been resolved?
Okay, so John, I know the intention is to have a narrative with the balanced scorecard, because that says that in the document. But in terms of linking it particularly with the risk register and closing the loop, as Michael says, have you got any initial thoughts on that?
No, I think that's a very sensible suggestion, actually, Stephen. I mean, we can do so. Clearly, we'll be tabling the bank scorecard at Exco, as we also do with the risk register. So, you know, taking Michael's observations on board, we'll try and make that almost a sequential agenda item, so we get that virtuous circle. And we also have a risk advisory group where we are looking at the risk register regularly. So again, we'll try and make sure the loop is identified through that. And yes, I agree with you. We will be providing a commentary going forward on all of it.
Because I think the narrative is the place to pick up some of those, particularly sensitive topics where we need to sort of understand the closure of the loop, as it were, I think, on any key risks. So, okay, yep. That's great. Thank you for that, Michael. Bruce, can I bring you in?
Yes, thank you. I know I keep returning to this theme, but something that's missing for me here in involving patients and the public is something along the lines of instances of patient or public input making an impact. Now, we've sort of talked about this earlier, with June talking about stories, other people talk about examples, but I urge you to consider something more, if you like, formal than that, defining, and it's not easy, defining what you mean by a patient exchange having an impact, because defining that, identifying it, remembering, and therefore capitalizing on them to develop your systems is something that not many people are doing, because it isn't easy. And if you can do this, and I somehow identify things that patients or the public have input that have had an impact, you would not only have a meaningful contribution to your balanced scorecard, it would also go into my perpetual agenda about you analyzing, publishing, learning, developing methods, and then publishing all this for the greater good and for the reputation of the agency in a way that other people have not managed to do. I've done it a tiny bit at NICE, which is why I know how difficult it is, but I really urge you to consider that as an element of the balanced scorecard.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Bruce. I was going to ask you about your experience elsewhere, and obviously with your other academic interests too. Is there anybody who's done something close to what you're talking about that we could use as sort of the catalyst, if you like, for the discussion?
I don't think there's anyone who's done it really well, which is what's quite exciting. We did it in a rudimentary way at NICE, but no, I think to think that through and develop it, because all the while water's flowing under the bridge, all the while you have these little example stories, etc., that somehow you should be capturing rather than just keeping a few of them as examples.
Yeah. Okay. So John, has there been much discussion on the patient engagement metrics? I think there probably has, actually, from my knowledge.
There has, but to be honest, I think it will be a continuing conversation, and I'd anticipate once Alison Cave arrives in July as Chief Safety Officer, you know, we will engage with her, and I'd expect to see further development of this quadrant, if you like, once we have her on board.
Yeah, I think that's fine. And I think, Mercy, I can see you nodding there. So I think from a Patient Safety and Engagement Committee point of view, I suspect that will continue to feature in some of your thinking as well.
Which was my point about getting underneath some of these figures at the Patient Safety and Engagement Committee, really, so that we actually know what went into the metrics in the first place. But actually, with Alison coming on board, it would be really good to see if we got the right metrics too. And I really approve of what Bruce was saying. We could really do something on impact measures and be kind of leading if we really put our minds to it.
Okay, no, that's great. Thank you, Mercy. And June, obviously, I know that you know, one of your key mantras is about always looking for the outcome and what's the impact of what we do. So it's probably times with your thinking too.
As well as Alison's contribution, we'll want to look at our regulatory science network for areas where research has been done. And we know that in areas like asthma and diabetes, that actually having a patient engaged in how the medicine is evaluated and communicated gives better outcomes in their health. So there may be some models, not so far from NICE, that we'd want to take in other areas where we've had an intervention. And we're looking ultimately at health outcomes that are meaningful to the patient. So it will be quite a change, as Bruce has said, and quite a challenge, but we may well link with academia as well to help do some of the legwork that we need to find evidence of a meaningful outcome.
Yeah, I think that's helpful, and it's no reason not to to go ahead with the balanced scorecard as it currently is. But I think we should be constantly looking to improve it and refine it. And this is a classic example where this is going to be a sort of probably a multi-month event to try and work our way through this. But I think looking at external input is going to be very helpful for that. David, can I bring you in, please?
Yeah, thanks very much. So I wanted to shift quadrant to enabling innovation. And I'm supporting a first-in-human study as we speak. So I'm delighted to see the clinical trials element captures first-in-human studies. I think they're really important. Not now, but it will be interesting to know what novel means. Does that mean novel therapeutic agent, like the study I'm doing this morning with a small interfering RNA, or maybe with stem cells? Or does it mean novel trial design? And those are two different things. They're both important, I think. The next ones, I have some problems. And what I'd really like to do is get under the bonnet of this and look at the thinking that goes behind it. Because depending on how small your grants are and unexciting, it's easy to get grants. So the number to me doesn't mean much. It's the value of the grant that matters. So I think I'd like to know what's happening there. Then again, with research papers, academics argue about this all the time, but you can publish small bits of work, slice and dice it to get lots of publications. Again, it's the impact that matters, but how you score the impact isn't clear here, and how you do that will be crucial. CPRD population coverage, I don't have a problem with, but the last one, again, about publications with CPRD, I think it should be the impact of those publications, and you could judge that by the journals that they go into. Some people would argue that's shorthand and not necessarily reliable, but I think I'd like to see what the impact of the papers is beyond the simple number.
Yeah. Okay. So John, again, is that something that's being discussed? Thinking about how we take it away from just counting things to actually impact an outcome.
It's certainly been discussed several times, Stephen. Unfortunately, we've always ended up with almost, the seniority, if you like, or the reputation of the journal. So any contributions gratefully received on how we can improve that.
Yeah. Okay. So again, I think it's a bit like the previous conversation in the sense that there's no reason not to continue with what we've got. But I think actually sort of looking to how we can evolve this to make it more impact and outcome focused would be helpful. So I think it'll be helpful. Christian, you might have a perspective on this.
Thanks. Just coming back to David's points, which are indeed very valid points. So just to clarify, novel in this respect means the clinical trial design rather than the substance. So that is indeed something that we want to measure because we want to, and we can come back to this later, we want to foster novel clinical trial design as so that the UK can be the good to-go point for clinical trials and clinical research. Now, research grants, number versus value, that is currently under discussion. It's a valid point. So there are good arguments in taking the value, and there are good arguments in taking the number of grants as well. It depends also on a grant strategy. I think this is what we have to discuss together with the board at some point. So for example, do you want to go for a few selected high value grants? Of course, then with the possibility that you fail to get the grant because you will not always get them? Or do you want to spread out more widely on smaller grants? And then you have, at the end of the day, more money, but you, of course, you have a higher relative failure rate as well because you're applying more widely. So that is something we have to discuss. I think the targeted grants are more reputationally valuable. So there might be some good arguments in that direction. But again, this is currently under internal discussions. And none of the publications, obviously, this is not a difficult, this is not an easy one because counting the number of papers is not an ideal measure. As you say, you can have a lot of low impact papers, even more, because they're easier to get, obviously. So we have also been thinking about this, how to measure impact. There are certain values that you can measure. And maybe it is worth looking at this again, indeed.
Yeah, you see, this is also possibly where the narrative helps us here, Christian, as well, because I think that we've got to be really careful that we don't end up with 500 measures, because that's not going to help us either. No. And so therefore, whichever ones we do choose is then a case of what can the board interpret from that until we have something that's more impact.
So we do have the impact score, sorry to say that, the impact score. And of course for CPRD, this is where the data of CPRD feeds in. So that is not necessarily in our control what the authors will do with the particular data set. So this is a bit of a difficult one as well, but at least it's a first measure that we have. Thanks.
Okay, that's great. David, were you wanting to come back on that?
Yeah, just one point. I wanted to ask the question, do we want novel, as well as novel trial designs? Obviously, MHRA has been promoting those and we know their value. So I think measuring that's good. But do we want interesting drugs to come to the UK? Do we want, novel therapeutics? And is that something we should be measuring? It's more a question than anything as another parameter.
Christian, just thinking of the innovation agenda?
Yeah, we could reflect on this indeed. The problem is how you define novel. So, because for example, if it's advanced therapies trial, so gene therapy, cell therapy, this is what we are measuring indeed. So we could put this. But obviously that would not be the entirety of innovation. You will also have small molecules which are highly targeting. You will maybe have other medicines like novel vaccine types. So we would have to come up with a good definition of this, but that is not sweeping this away. I think we should look into this as well. Again, as Stephen said, it depends on how many measures we want to put into the balanced scorecard. So we thought that the novel clinical trial design is currently one which is underserved in the clinical community worldwide. So this is why we put this as a measure, because it directly measures our impact as an innovative regulator as well. Whereas the innovative, the novel substances, this is again in the control of the companies who are running global developments and who may or may not choose the UK or other regions for their clinical trial. But still, it is a measure of impact as well. So I agree with David.
Yeah, and it's not just about innovative products, because actually effectively generics and biosimilars, are also really important for the health service. So we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that we can only just focus on brand new stuff, because actually they are an important component. Mandy, would you like to ask the last question on this particular topic?
Okay, yes. Thanks for that, Stephen. I think this is a big improvement on where we've been, and I think that evolution is really important. One of the things I'd like to see us think, we've got a big change agenda. How are the measures here enable us to see the progress with that? So from that, I mean, is building on what we're saying about the different sorts of drugs and getting early access to medicines. How is that being measured to make sure that our change programme is actually delivering the things we're wanting to do? So maybe understanding a little bit more about, you know, how many generics drugs we're authorising, the different sorts, as we've said earlier, but also about where we've collaborated to get those approvals through. And so we're actually, and then the different disease areas. So we get perhaps a slightly richer picture of what it means, rather than just the efficiency, which is net days to determination, but also that shifting the nature of what we're doing so that we can help measure the transformation programme.
Okay, John, has there been any thoughts around the transformation programme and how we can demonstrate the progress as Mandy's suggesting?
To be honest, our main focus on the change programme has probably really been, you know, time, cost, quality, you know, the traditional project ones. So we'll give that some thought. I mean, we come back to the outcome measures, you know, how do we track that over time? So yeah, we'll pick up on that.
Yeah.
And just one final thing, we're just spending out a huge amount of money on our systems and IT. We don't have any measure here of the effectiveness of that, either in the financial or anything, or, you know, system uptime or anything like that. So I wonder if that's something which is an omission.
Yeah, happy to look at that one as well in a kind of efficiency quadrant or whatever. So yeah, we'll have a look at that one.
Okay. So something that we do in my NHS Trust, of which I'm the deputy chair, is, you know, the NHS is really good at having lots and lots and lots of metrics. But each month, actually, we have a spotlight report where something that we might want to dig into a little bit more detail to provide context for the board, but we don't actually have to then report it every single month. Because if we're not careful, the way these things work, as I've seen them before, we start off with 29, within a month we'll have 50, and then in 2 years we'll have 100. And that isn't very helpful. Whereas the opportunity just to dive into a particular topic of interest allows you to go in for the 1 month, and then you don't continue to report it every month after that. And it just helps to keep the board grounded. And that might be something else we might want to think about, John, just as we go through the reporting mechanism. But, I think the best thing is to start using this. That will be my strong recommendation. And I think we'll continue to evolve it. And I think some of the contributions today have been really helpful in terms of how we can continue to evolve this. So I think let's start, I think will be my first suggestion. So would the board be content with that approach? Yes. Yeah, I'm seeing nods around the table and thumbs up. So, okay, John, you've got the approval to proceed. So thank you for that. And thank you for your effort.
Very much.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is innovation. So we already talked about this partly already, and page 21, it's about how we can build on combined ways of working with the Health Research Authority to accelerate the approval of clinical trials. So Christian, you can assume that we've read the paper, but were there some introductory comments you'd like to make?
Thanks, Stephen. Indeed, combined ways of working is an important milestone or an important item that we have. Which I have only recently come to join, so to speak, but the collaboration and integration between MHRA and ethics, and this is what it is, has come a long way, especially during the pandemic. So there were different approaches, different timelines, and this now offers trial sponsors a single application and submission route. So coordinated regulatory and ethics review to set timeframes, and that I think is a very important aspect. This was meant to be a pilot, but actually, we only recently decided and proposed that this will now become our main portal, which I think is an important milestone. So it will become business as usual. It is part of our ambition to streamline the clinical trials process in the UK, both procedurally, but also scientifically. So you will have seen in the paper, there are a number of items which are not only procedurally, but also on content, on the science. And it is one of our which is one of our two major topics in the Science and Innovation Delivery Plan. The other one, you remember, is delivering world-leading research, innovation, and clinical trials is one of the major points here, because this is where the UK can make and must make a difference. So maybe I stop here, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah, that's great, Christine. You know, there's no doubt this proposal fits very clearly with the government's ambitions around making the UK a very attractive place for clinical research and development, part of our vibrant life sciences sector. And I should just also say that June and I have met the Health Research Authority Chair and Chief Executive on a couple of occasions in just the last 2 months. So we see them as absolutely key partner as a way of going forward. If I could just maybe ask the first question, Christine. Obviously, I'm just looking at the strategic ambitions, and we've laid out 10 of them in total, which all look really valuable. But actually, what's the priority from your point of view in terms of how you'd like to see this proposal developed? What are the priorities of these ambitions?
Thanks, Stephen. So indeed, this is an ambitious program, and there are certain timelines to it. But I think the very imminent one is the scale up of this to become the route for applications. So that's by end of this year. So that has a natural, quite quick timeline to it. So I think that will be, excuse me, the immediate priority. And then also to enhance the streamlining of beyond approvals. That includes also trial setup. So we are thinking about piloting this with MHRA, for example, or other organizations, and explore how this will fit also to ILAP, so the Innovative Licensing and Access Pathway, which is our other asset for innovation. And I think these two have to be joining up. So that I think is another priority. Obviously, the UK regulations via the MMD Act to provide more transparency, patient centricity, and so on, will be part of this. And risk proportionality is a very important aspect. We've been in discussions, and I've been hearing in various meetings that the risk proportionality aspect for how you approve clinical trials, what requirements you have, is actually very important. I think that this needs to be a priority as well. Obviously, we touched upon innovation, so innovative products, and part of that is medicines device combinations. So I think this needs to be also looked at with priority. And as I said, some of the content, like for example, innovative trial designs with nice SMC, for example, that is one. And the final one, which I personally find very important as well, is to work with our international colleagues in the Access Consortium. We've recently seen how well that works with the scientific guideline on COVID-19 vaccine variants. And I think that was a good test bed to also look into items like this, where we can make a real difference for patients and early access as well.
So a lot of priorities, but I think I take the point very well. David, as an expert in clinical development and someone who's researching even today, what's your perspective?
Yeah, I approve of this. I think this is something that has legs as a broader approach from the agency. So I'm very positive about this. I guess my highlights would be encouraging innovative trial design. I think that is underused and could be a very important USP for MHRA. So I fully support that. Anything that streamlines the application and approval process, especially for multi-site studies, would be wonderful, assuming it doesn't introduce new risk. So I would welcome that. And perhaps my only question for Christian is, would any of that streamlining help those of us who have their research mainly funded by MRC or by the charities? Because the problem of multi-site studies and multiple approvals is a major problem for all researchers, and it adds cost and time, and so disadvantages patients. That's my question. The third point I'd make was...
Answer the question first, David, and then we'll come back.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
So Christian, do you want to answer that particular point?
Yeah, so I'm taking this indeed as an important item, because this is it should not just be large industry trials that are streamlined. It should especially be academic trials as well. So I will discuss that with the team. I think there are some items which are outside the MHRA, but we still can help with them. So I think we should take them on board. And indeed, part of the UK vision is to streamline the costing and contracting process, for example. So our colleagues are immediately aware of this and are working on this.
Yeah. Okay. And David, then your next point.
Yeah. Well, so my last point was, I suppose I had a slight anxiety about the moves to encourage greater use of real-world data, given we kind of recognise that that's subject to bias and confounding, and it had talked about even including the investigation of new products, and I was worried about that. But when I read the guidance, it says nothing is completely ruled out in principle, including the investigation of new products. So it's a much more modest proposal, and I absolutely agree that real world data is crucial. And of course, it's the role of CPRD to provide some of that real world data. So yeah, once I looked at what was offered, it seemed very reasonable to me. So I think this is a good paper.
Yeah. So Kristen, the use of real world data is one of the options, but it's not going to be the only one. That's the way I read it.
Yeah, indeed, I can confirm that. And of course, we have to look at the methodological side of things. But I think it is the time now where we have to actively look at this, if it can actually help and streamline the process, so that we can learn from real world data as well. I think it's now time to look at this. But as David said, the gold standard is still a direct comparison.
Yeah. And things like the other area of real world data with our CPRD sprint service, enabling the more rapid identification of patients for clinical trials. That's another component to accelerating the overall process, as I would see it. So I think the real world evidence has many facets to it. Barbara, can I bring you into the conversation? Nearly there.
Can you hear me now?
I can now, thank you.
This annoyingly won't unmute very easily. I wanted to ask about the liaison that you mentioned in the paper with ethics approval. Every researcher, especially one who does multi-center and even international trials, understands the absolute jungle of multiple ethics oversights that they have to negotiate. And in fact, with the increasingly good public and patient engagement at MHRA and the very large database and the number of expert patients who now engage with MHRA, I wonder whether the clinical trial service could actually involve a generic ethics committee offering.
Okay. Christine, do you think that's part of the solution, or is it more, working hand in glove with HRA and the ethics team?
Well, I hear this intervention, obviously, but I think for now it is working hand in glove with the ethical committees. I think there has been some progress. For example, the choice of the ethical committee and other items, which I think is a step towards this. I think the independence of the ethical committee is an important area. And but of course we are working with them, and also our assessment has helped reassuring. I think that is important because we do have safety measures in clinical trials, which of course help understand the ethical implications of clinical trial. So science and ethics are sometimes overlapping and supporting each other, but I think for now it is that kind of dichotomy which I think has a good reason. I think there's a single ethics opinion. I think the divergence is more around local approvals, and of course centralization there might actually help.
Yeah. You see, certainly I think our combined working with HRA is giving us a much greater understanding of the ethics processes and the complexity that haven't typically been part of our regulatory domain. And I think that's where the combined ways of working is genuinely helping. And June, is there anything else you would like to add to how we're working with HRA, and then maybe how we might even extend to NIHR in due course?
Well, as you said earlier, Stephen, the new CEO, Matt Westmore, and Terence Stevenson have shown a great willingness, having seen the success of combined ways of working, to look ahead in quite an ambitious way. So this paper really is a good launch pad for yet more efforts to streamline, look to innovation in terms of trial design, and really to bring patients into. So I think this could really be a very good partnership arrangement, and we may make 2 into 3 with the National Institute of Health Research as well. So it really is a case of, if the board is happy with this paper, then watch this space.
Okay, that's great. And Kathy, could I maybe just bring you in from a Northern Ireland devolved administration's point of view? Because obviously there are slightly different mechanisms in some of the devolved administrations. And I just wondered if you had any observations of anything else we need to strengthen to make this sort of useful for your area as well.
Thanks, Stephen. First of all, I would like to say I really welcome the paper and the ambition for accelerating clinical trials. And I note that it is, UK-wide ambition. And I suppose I would just ask that, in relation to Northern Ireland, that, well, actually I would like to ask Christian, does he envisage any issues that might arise in relation to Northern Ireland being able to fully benefit from these new processes just as a result of the Northern Ireland Protocol?
Yeah. Christian?
Thanks, Kathy. Well, so the Northern Ireland Protocol relates to the manufacture and import of a medicine, not the authorization. So the MHRA authorizes for all of the UK. So Northern Ireland will immediately benefit from this, as do the other devolved nations. Where it comes in is the movement of the medicine, for example, and other more practical aspects. And here we are very proactively in discussions with the department and other relevant bodies in order to look at if there's something we need to facilitate, and if so, we will facilitate this.
Okay. And June, was there anything else you wanted to add in terms of what else we could do to support our devolved administrations?
No, I think, as Kathy probably knows, there is an issue that we're really working hard on, as Christian says, is the material for the trials. But the oversight is always for a trial at national level, so UK-wide. Yeah.
That's great. But very much want you involved in the process, Kathy. So and Northern Ireland is very much part of the UK, so that's great. Okay, so I think, unless there are any other questions, I think we would like to sort of say thank you to Christian and the clinical trials team that have helped to put this together. It's a really important strategic initiative for us to support UK life sciences, and this is one of the key streams of the government's ambitions, which we need to be part of. So we're very much part of the solution, and I think we can endorse this paper. And note it with our thanks. So thank you very much. If we move on to the next item, we've talked about patient safety almost continuously through the meeting so far, and that's not going to stop now. It's going to continue. So we're going to talk about patient safety and Safety Connect, which is a new sort of system that you'll see in the paper. It's on page 30 of the board pack. And the question is, how is Safety Connect going to improve the safety monitoring of all medical products? And Bruce Campbell, I think you're going to make a few introductory comments and then pass to John Quinn.
Stephen, thank you. Well, John Quinn's asked me to say a few words of introduction about this paper on the Safety Connect programme. And to do so, I'd like to refer you to section 3, which defines the 3 main themes, namely patients, performance and partnerships, because these help to illustrate the complexity of this programme, which is multifaceted to a degree that makes it quite difficult to visualize and therefore to debate the challenges, which are what the board needs to consider. Because Safety Connect draws together a diverse range and series of changes, all in the context of an environment which in itself is in a state of uncertainty and a lot of change. Regarding patients, it seeks to realize much of the agenda confronting the Patient Safety and Engagement Committee, which we spent time on recently. The performance aspect is especially important to understand because it reflects the agency's commitment to incorporate devices with medicines in a single system for signal detection and assurance of safety. And this poses particular issues, I think, for those in the agency dealing with devices who, in addition, face the triple challenges of radical changes to their internal management structure, of the complete renewal of device regulation post-Brexit, and the creation of a brand new medical devices register with complex issues to other systems. And those linkages lead me on to the third aspect, which is partnerships, and which are quite complicated, but which need to become very efficient in the context of patient safety. Because the agency's own systems, some of which are developing, evolving, including the yellow card system, the devices registry, and the various channels of information about adverse events, will only fulfill their potential if they're effectively linked with other developing national systems. And I refer in particular to the new patient safety incident management system of NHS England, the medical device information system being developed by NHS Digital, and other systems all being coordinated by NHS X. And these will all be vital partners if Safety Connect is going to achieve its goals. Those then are some of the challenges to this ambitious programme, and I'll hand over to John Quinn to explain some of the ways in which the challenges will be addressed.
Great. Well, thank you, Bruce. John.
Thank you, Bruce. I think it's worth noting that in framing this discussion, I think that complexity was really worth bringing to the fore. And that's one of the reasons why we've structured it as a programme, because programmes are designed to manage the dependencies between that kind of multifaceted problem. So I'm going to walk through a bit of the progress for how we've been getting on and our next steps. But I think it's worth stating up front that this is, despite the challenges, this is incredibly exciting stuff. This has been a vision that's been developing in the agency for some time. It responds to some pretty heavy challenges out there. And I think this is the time to grasp the nettle despite the complexity. So I think it's really exciting. Progress so far has been really good. To update on the patient side, there's been 229 people that we've talked to at the start of the process through one-to-ones and around 22 workshops. So at the core of this is designing around the people who most benefit from the services. That's just the start though. This is a process where the patients in particular will be involved in the prototyping. So actually seeing the systems develop as they go, commenting on them, allowing that feedback loop to kick in. So I think that's really critical because that will help make sure the outcomes that we're trying to seek are grounded in their needs up front. So that will continue, particularly as we design. In terms of performance, I think we've already made some pretty good progress. Bruce is right, there is a coming together of processes, and this is the link, particularly the board should note, for the future operating model. So we're going to have a look at our processes, trying to bring them together because there are efficiencies to be gained there, but almost as importantly, better decision making as a result in our view. In terms of delivery thus far on performance, we've delivered a pandemic portal at quite short notice. The AI tool that we put in place works with some quite deep analytics, and you'll see in the paper that the increase of the expected volume and how we handled that. That's partly because we've built this in a cloud environment, allowing us to respond. It's also used neuro-linguistic programming to manage some of that large amount of data. And of course, in all of those things, you have to learn as you go. So certainly in the foothills of that. We've researched new models of signal detection. That research is really important. And later on this afternoon, you'll hear about the kind of smart nature of our strategy that fundamentally looks at how technology can really go the extra mile, not just on volume, but insights too. As part of the programme, we've supported the African Union in their signal detection around COVID through Bill and Melinda Gates. And we're undertaking quite a major procurement, so we're getting the supplies in. In terms of partnerships, I think that's absolutely critical. Bruce mentioned both PSIMS and the medical device information service. And I think that link to device registries and how you develop data and information standards to link that data seamlessly will be something that builds over time. And I'm really looking forward to working across the system on the government's the health data strategy to kind of bring that to life. But also the yellow card being embedded into the NHS app is going to be a critical part of that. And that's about standardization. So working in system is going to be crucial to the success of this program. In terms of next steps, yes, for procurement, we should have that answered in the next few weeks. When Alison joins us, I think Alison will want to have a look. We'll need to brief her and get her hand on the tiller. And I think that comes at a good time just for course correction. Yellow cards updates in September with a target date of delivering in the spring next year. So I think it's hopefully the paper summarizes that complexity and you get a sense of delivering as we're going this complex but ambitious program of work. Thank you, Stephen.
Well, thank you, John. It's quite clear from the timeline, actually. This work started back in 2019, so it's a multi-year project. What I like about it, it's clearly linked with the delivery plan, and there's some very clear deliverables that you've quite explicitly identified in that. And there's been strong engagement with patients throughout. So, I think all those components work quite well together. So, in terms of questions, David, do you want to kick us off on this?
Yeah, so let me just start by saying I think this is wonderful work and I think it's very valuable. I have a kind of slightly different question. If we go back to the IMMDS, what the concerns were a failure to listen to and respond to patients, which to me meant direct engagement. And it talks about engaging more with patients and their outcomes. Now, Safety Connect is a wonderful but highly technical solution. And we have a scenario here, which is an adverse event, which didn't even stop the patient taking their treatment and made them feel proud for being involved with the research or response. And that's the vast majority, I hope. But the reason we have IMMDS is because some patients weren't happy. They were highly unsatisfied with what happened to them. They didn't feel they had a route to engage with MHRA. And I can't help but think one of the things we need to do is have some sort of helpline with a real person at the end of the line to talk to people who are not satisfied with what's happened to them. This is all about the sort of thing I hate, which is technical solutions where you get bounced from one thing to another. It's awfully important, but a real person can make a huge difference to those who are dissatisfied. So that's the only point I would like to make here. But I have one other, which is probably more
maybe just cover that one, David.
Yeah.
I'll come to you in due course. I've got the hand. So, John, in terms of just response to how do we actually sort of bring people into this and not just technology? Any thoughts on that?
I mean, it's an excellent point. I think the focus in the paper you'll see absolutely around the technical platform. It's not just that, though. The platform is of processes, behavior, and data. And I think getting patients an opportunity to own their data. So this isn't a one-way, fire it into the agency and forget. We have to see what we can do to kind of have that two-way relationship. So certainly that. In terms of real people at the end of the phone, I mean, I think we have that, and that's in the customer contact center. I'm not sure Rachel wants to come in on that, but I think it's absolutely part of our vision as one agency that we're having the centers in place to be able to answer those queries. What we need to do is make sure that they're well informed and they can pass to the experts when that's needed.
Well, we can maybe also pick that up because obviously part of Rachel's communication strategy is around creating a dialogue. And I think that's the point that David's making. Sometimes you can do that electronically, sometimes you can do that in person. So we need different channels to enable different routes, I think is probably the way to go. But June, do you want to just come in on that?
I think David raises a really important point where things have meant that a patient who's been treated with a healthcare intervention has harm that is permanent and serious. So what we've done is engage with the patient reference group of the IMMDS very openly on what they want from a responsive system. And it was part of a number of questions we spent an afternoon looking at. And so I think the message I'd give is that we are facing this now, and we'll look together with the new Patient Safety Commissioner when we have one at what good looks like. And it may well mean that in addition to, as John says, our customer service centre, we do have some dedicated help and support. But the message for today is we are talking to those people about what they want from the system. It's not that there hasn't been engagement up to now, but I think we have to use the main driver of many of the issues we're seeing now, which is the Cumberledge Review, to actually give us that impetus to make sure it meets all scenarios for all people, not just an ADR that happened to happen, but you got on with life and with your treatment.
Yeah, and at our July board meeting, we're going to have a report on the deliverables from the Cumberland Review. So I think that's another opportunity to close the loop on that, David, as well, potentially.
Yeah. So just on that point, I mean, I think, you know, I've dealt with customer care services. We all have. It's having the same person to come back to who you don't have to tell the whole story to all over again that can make a difference to how one feels about how one's being treated. So I think it's something that needs to be thought about. That's my opinion. The second thing is just a question for June, I think, really. We're going to be doing much more broad sharing with patients online about their problem and other people who've had their problem. I just wonder if there's any kind of risk in that and how you mitigate against the risk of amplification, like the sort of side effect reporting that was seen in Denmark with the HPV vaccine, where there's a sort of potential for amplification of hysteria, where there wasn't a real effect, but people started to think about it. They got worried about it, like statin side effects with the muscle aches, which are probably largely not related to the drug at all.
Yeah, June?
Well, Stephen, thank you. It's a really important point, David. And as we start to have a system that isn't just receiving and disseminating, it's having dialogue, we've really got to be very careful and, as well as being open, but to make sure our messages are accessible. There's been a lot of work done about how different demographics like to understand and receive and debate risk as it applies to them during COVID. And as you'll know, with various issues around the vaccine safety monitoring, we've been learning as we go, but it's really important that we transfer those into the new system so that there is not the danger you talk about inadvertent risk amplification. But we'll factor that in, particularly through the work that Rachel's team is doing.
Okay, that's great. Mercy, I'll come to you next, and then I'll go to Anthony, actually, if that's okay. So, Mercy, just thinking about your question.
Yeah, just a few comments, really. Well, obviously, I like the joined up approach and the link to things like the NHS app. We've looked at parts of this in the Patient Safety and Engagement Committee, which is basically things like the yellow card scheme and stuff. So I note the 4.3, you know, having kind of one system where, you know, people just use one form, no matter what their issue is. All those things are really good improvements. So, you know, kind of, but I've also noted the fact that we do need to work very closely with our partners to make sure that, you know, they're doing their bit as well and delivering, because this is our reputation as well. And I was just wondering what the patient safety incident management systems were. What other data sources are there? Are they the things like the registries? Because that's my kind of understanding, and that's where those partnerships and making sure NHS Digital and other people are kind of linking into us and doing their bit, really. So I just wanted to double check on that, and also say that obviously Safety Connect, it's really important that this links to the comm strategy as well, and our profile. It's great to see, for instance, yellow card being taken up by more people because of the COVID vaccines, but really in the general population, yellow card means nothing to most people. So I think we've still got a long way to go, and seeing that link through from a system that kind of supports it through to our comm strategy and profile raising is really important.
Yeah, John, could I just come to you in terms of data sources, and then I'll go to June.
It is particularly in devices. It's the data is not as clean as we would like. It's a very fragmented world, and I think with the NDIS, I think there's an opportunity there to standardise and apply standards across the system. We're incredibly supportive of that, because as soon as you've got standards and you can move into the, sorry to go technical, but APIs, you can automate these things. So I think that we're tantalizingly close to fixing some of that, particularly around the medical devices side. But I don't want to, it's not going to be a magic wand. I think it's going to be data set by data set that we have to work through. So we'll have to pick them out. In terms of the committee, Mercy, I think there's probably work we can do to to kind of keep that informed and test as we go. So certainly as we get into prototyping, there'll be, it looks like this, the journey is this. I think that's a real opportunity to see where we can link up with the wider comm strategy, as you say. So I think that's an opportunity. I think we want to get our supplier, then we'll start getting into prototyping, and then I think seeing it is hugely powerful.
That'd be great. So I'm hearing a commitment there, Mercy, to keep the Patient Safety Engagement Committee updated. So which I think is great. June, was there anything else you wanted to add on this particular point?
Not really. Two things. It's keeping Patient Safety and Engagement Committee fully in the loop. But secondly, that we're working closely, particularly with the Patient Safety Incident Management System as that evolves, because that gathers in a lot of device-related and also near misses, which we can learn from, that actually don't become full-blown adverse reactions. So it should really be an information sharing world where the right information gets to the right forum for the right decision in real time. So that's the goal, but we'll keep the committee well engaged.
Okay, thank you for that. Anthony, I know you've been having problems trying to raise your hand.
Yeah, sorry, there seems to be something happening in the background with Zoom today, so I know I'm not the only one. It was around the artificial intelligence. I'm a massive fan of the use of technology and this system and driving it forward. But from an assurance point of view, I was just interested in how we're reviewing and validating those tools, because obviously there is a risk going forward, John. We've seen errors happening in other big systems where artificial intelligence have grown and gone down alternative routes. And I think that may be okay when you're selling books, but in this area, we need to really be confident that the use of our artificial intelligence is not missing or not duplicating or not invalidating. So it's a simple question, John, and it may be too complicated to respond in detail. And just a quick, yes, we're doing it, is fine.
Simple question. We don't need a complex answer, but we need to know you're doing something.
At the moment, this is free text, so it's I wouldn't say this is the deepest AI we will be using. I think it's a really important point, though, Anthony, and I think you're right that we have to think of this at source. I would start with the ethics and the standards we're going to apply, and I do think we need to do some work as an agency on that to guide all of the development, particularly as we get into this area. So yes, we are doing it. There is more work to come. I think it needs an agency-wide approach on that.
Okay, that's great.
If I may, perhaps it's something that should be reporting back to one of the committees, Stephen. I'm not sure which one, but it just feels to me that given the importance of that at the moment, it's something that needs to be just checked over the coming years.
Yeah, I think the data standards may well be an audit risk assurance committee responsibility, but I think actually the oversight of patient, of this particular program could well be also across patient safety engagement as well, I would imagine. But Michael, I'm sort of offering you your assurance services around that. Would you concur with that?
Yeah, Stephen, very happy to take that forward. That seems logical, actually. Can I build on that? I mean, I've got a question, if I may.
Yep.
And then it's probably an obvious question from me. But Bruce and John explain what we're doing very clearly. And I'm interested, the paper is very much about what the agency is doing. But as Bruce and David have said, there are a wide range of external dependencies on which I think the success of this really depends. So my question to John and June is, are we confident that we've got the governance right in terms of the involvement of other players, so that we're all working in the common direction and we understand other people's interests? I've seen these sorts of projects fail in the past, drawing on my previous experience, where you haven't got the governance right from day one. I wondered if John could say a little bit more about that, how that operates in practice.
Okay, John.
Yes, so certainly from a project delivery perspective, we have Mick Foy, who should be noted in this conversation. He's a real driving force and the SRO behind this work. He chairs the program board. We have good representation internally, and that follows all of our governance. Just back to who has oversight of those sort of technical and AI standards. Before ARAC, I would say it's the committee I chair, the DDAC committee, who should have that job. In terms of wider relationships and partnerships, I think it's a really interesting point. We know that NHSX, DHSC are looking at data system-wide. June will know that there's a lot of conversations with various contacts to us coming to us at the moment about data standards across all of our systems. I think there's likely to be some system-wide governance, and I think we want to get in at ground zero to influence those terms of reference so we can get some oversight there. That would be my preference. June,
June, were you going to add something? Or?
Well, I was going to say it's a bit of a theme, but Alison Cave is going to no doubt want to pick this up to do with the external governance, to really make the most of the opportunity that John has described, a real government spotlight on this, and you know, the unique role we have, which has been really in the spotlight with COVID in terms of the signals of safety, plus obviously the government's response to Cumberledge, which will be coming up in the next couple of months as the first anniversary is with us. So it's a really good area. I think we'll look to come back to the board to display what we propose through ARAC. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Yeah, Mandy.
Yes, it's quite a lot of what I was going to say has been said. The first one is starting with the patients and making that as simple as possible for reporting. I agree with Mercy. Yellow card, I still wonder if that's our right brand or whatever, in terms of really trying to say to patients what it is. So the FDA call it MedWatch, which sort of means something a little bit more. I know yellow card was something GPs used to report on. But I think simplicity of our front-end systems is absolutely key. So building on what David said, being able to report an adverse event in a structured way is really important. So having multiple yellow cards, we might have had that for COVID, but that's actually quite complicated. And to the patient, they don't seem to join up. They might join up for the MHRA and our analysis, but it doesn't look joined up to patients. So I think that's sort of quite important in terms of it seemed to be working through. And I think then taking back to the other end, building on the conversation previously, was around our the way we share data back in terms of standard, keeping anonymization, and how to do that in that coordinated way across different agencies. And I think Michael's point about governance is absolutely key, because that could trip us up badly if we're not careful in terms of the way data is shared. So I think at both ends, really thinking different, you know, simplicity and joined up, but also that responsibility of feeding back and just how we're doing that.
Yeah, I think certainly the branding of yellow card, and you know, that fits quite nicely with some of the communications work we're going to be doing. That's also a review to be done in the delivery plan too. So I think we will absolutely come back to that. I think, you know, the reinforcement of keeping it simple for patients is exactly the right, you know, the right message. And in some ways, trying to bring all this information together through Safety Connect seems to be one of the ways to achieve that. Is the way I would interpret that. Okay, so were there any other thoughts? Otherwise, I'm pretty quite keen to move on. But John, obviously the report was provided for assurance. I think we're assured that you're working on this. There's clearly a plan in place. I think important messages today have come out around, you know, how do patients interact with this, you know, and looking at multiple choices. I think there's a strong theme of governance, and then actually how then does the board gain its assurance, both from you know, patient engagement perspective, but also a risk perspective. And I think, yeah, the governance around the external sources of data as well as the internal, I think is important. And then I think we'll probably need to come back to, yeah, things like yellow card and branding in due course, which is also likely to be on the agenda because of the delivery plan. So I think we can note the board, note the report for assurance, and thank you and the team for the work that they've been involved in doing that. Okay, so if we're content, I'd like to move on to the next item, which is about our communications strategy. So we've got again, an in-depth report here, Rachel. You can assume that we've read it, but are there a couple of points you'd like us to highlight, and then we'll go to questions?
Yeah, thanks very much, Stephen. So this new communications and reputation strategy is absolutely key to us becoming an outward-facing transformed agency. And so through the strategy, we are looking at refocusing the way we communicate with all our stakeholders, but with a particular focus on patients and the public and healthcare professionals. And we are looking to build on the greatly increased profile that the agency has received over the last year through the pandemic. But really important to highlight that this supports the One Agency strategy and the new delivery plan. So what we are looking to achieve is a real shift in how we communicate that's focused on increasing two-way communication and dialogue, and some of that has been picked up through the discussion this morning. We feel it's particularly important to engage more broadly across different communities, and with a change in the kind of language and tone that we engage with. So very much looking at two-way communication, and in response to some of the feedback we've had over the last year. So we've set out a statement of what we want the agency to be known for over the next 2 years. We've set out 4 clear communication objectives for that period, which will deliver through a programme of proactive and innovative communications. And some of that will be through digital, but equally, as others have highlighted, some will be face-to-face, because we need a mix of methods. It's not one size fits all. And we're looking at metrics through a reputation index, which would be part of the balanced scorecard, which again, the board has already discussed. I think it's really important to highlight that this is a strategy for everyone in the agency. It's not just about the work of the communications division. It's about influencing every interaction that all of our staff have with all of our stakeholders, patients and the public. So there is quite a big cultural shift element to the strategy. There's been a number of people and groups that have fed into the development of this work, particular thanks to board members and also to stakeholders, including members of the Patient Group Consultative Committee, who both shared insights with us, contributed their views, and to Patient Safety and Engagement Committee, who had some very helpful comments on a very early draft, which has evolved considerably since that meeting. And thanks to our exec committee, Mercy and Antony, for their subsequent comments on later versions. So in summary, Chairman, it's an ambitious strategy. It aims to change the way we communicate, building on the profile of the agency, but addressing the feedback we've received, and looking forward to the discussion. And we're asking the board to approve the strategy and the communications priorities to build public and stakeholder trust.
Okay, thank you. That's really clear. I'll come to Anthony in a moment, but if I can start with Mercy first, because this actually went through the Patient Safety Engagement Committee, an earlier draft. Can you just give us an update on your perspective on this, Mercy?
Yes, in fact, it was non-exec and the patients reps who looked at some of the content. So we haven't seen the final paper, but obviously we commented on the content, and it is reflected now in the final paper. And some of that was really about things like two-way communication and separating patients and the public, because they are different audiences. What I like to highlight is some of the things that I really look forward to seeing at our committee, which is obviously developing metrics that measure outcomes, and so ensuring that those are delivered. The co-design element of it, lots of communication being co-designed by people, and we would obviously be kind of monitoring that. And the stance on proactive versus reactive, so being much more proactive in our communication. But it's also not waiting for people to get to us. We need to be reaching out to them and having a program of reaching out to people. And as I highlighted, the general public is one of those that we need to be reaching. So yeah, so I really welcome. It's quite an ambitious strategy, but you know, I'd really like to see how it's going to be delivered. I was really happy to see that we are dependent and all parts of the agency delivering this. The communications team is a small team. This is a hub and spoke model. So really to also have a communications objective for all staff to see how they're delivering on this is really useful. It's a mechanism I could kind of understand and sort of say, oh, right, that's how the strategy is going to be delivered through to all members of the MHRA, which is kind of really important, because otherwise, often in comms, it's like the comms team does it, but this really has to translate to everybody owning, you know, kind of profile, reputation and engagement with all our different stakeholders in this. So that was just the comments I was going to have, and the importance of partnerships with the DHSC, because obviously they sign off quite a lot of our comms, and I want to see how that kind of works and how we're engaging with them. I don't know if Catherine wants to comment on it or not, but you know, the DHSC seems to me kind of a key component of this when it comes to our communications.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's pick that up in two parts. So June, I know it's a strong ambition of yours is that this is owned by the agency, yeah, and not just a communications team responsibility. Is there anything you want to add on that?
No, just to say that it has to be, as Mercy has said, this hub and spoke. And if we're to change and shift gear, it is readiness to get engaged in dialogue, to use the tone that people find welcoming and receptive. And really, I think also to be focused on outcomes to deliver. People want to know what we've done and not what our activities are. So there will be some key criteria that we'll follow, and it will be backed up by training so that we can all be helped to shift gear into that new way of engaging. Yeah. But big thanks to the comms team for getting us there, and to Mercy's committee.
That's great. And Catherine, just coming to you in terms of Department of Health, obviously, you know, building trust, you know, in what we do is an important component for us, but it's also important for the department. Is there anything that you want to add from your perspective?
I think this is a good proposal and support the way forward. I think the experience of the last 14 months has shown us that the public responded well to what MHRA has to say and the expertise and reassurance that they can offer. And I think we need to build on that and get the communication right so that the public can benefit from the expertise and knowledge and data that MHRA has access to, and can get the right messages out there.
Yeah. To the public. Okay. That's great. Thank you. Anthony, can I come to you, because it's obviously an area of expertise of yours, is communications. So I'm interested in your perspective.
Yeah, I have worked quite closely with the team, and what I would like to say about this is to remind everybody here that this is a strategy. So for those of you who are looking for the tactics, they are there, and the team I have to say, we do have real expertise in the comms team who will be able to support this cross-agency delivery of direct and indirect communications. But I think what's helpful with this strategy is two things. One, it very much prioritizes for people, this is what we're going to focus on. We've in the past, I think, suffered as an organization from, not just in comms, but in other areas where we could see all of these issues and try to deal with all of these issues at the same time. And that's just impossible because you don't do anything well. I think if we can follow this strategy through, it will deal with some of the key issues we've been focused on over the past 3 years. And specifically for the people on the comments, because I've been monitoring the chat as we've been going along, I think one of the things it will hopefully do, well, no, I'm not going to say hopefully it will do, is remove this black hole, particularly for members of the public, where they join a consultation or they fill in a consultation. There is a clear priority at the beginning of this, and at the very strong focus that this is going to result in two-way communication and make sure we don't have this issue where people engage and then hear nothing back. That's just unacceptable. The focus on direct and indirect communications for everybody may not be clear in this paper, but it is there. And that's for where, as a sort of technical term, it's not technical at all, We will communicate directly to patients, directly to professionals, but also we know that one of the most influential ways to communicate is indirectly. So Barbara, for example, through the professional organisations themselves, through engaging ourselves and making sure our guidance is embedded in NICE guidance. So what I would say is I'd like people to look at this paper on the basis of it being a strategy and be assured that from what I've seen of the operational tactics below it, they're well on the way to making things work the way we'd hoped they would work.
Okay, well, I think that's a very helpful endorsement, Anthony. So thank you very much for that. Bruce, can I bring you into the conversation?
Yeah, can I shift the focus to healthcare professionals? Obviously, my main experience is with doctors, and I'd be interested to know David's reaction to what I'm going to say as another practicing clinician. And that is, as I read this through, making notes to my red pen as usual, I got to 4.7 and said, oh, it's available, information available digitally via cascade systems. And I wrote there, how confident are we in these? How effective are they? And I then got to the next page, which said healthcare professionals are the risk is our advice isn't always acting on our messages compete with other health agencies. And that, I have to say, bothers me because still now the main impact on health professionals, I think, is NICE guidance. Stuff from the MHRA, I think, certainly to hospital doctors, is relatively unfamiliar. And the agency has gone to a lot of trouble collaborating with NICE to produce a seamless system for looking at new pharmaceuticals, for example. So, you know, one goes into the other. And I suppose I'm just asking the question is, in this strategy, it seems to me the agency has two options with healthcare professionals. Either to continue a very single-minded approach to itself being recognized and more familiar as a source of advice, or really combining with NICE so that healthcare professionals, doctors, know that they can, when they get stuff, it may be about NICE best practice, it may be about regulatory decisions, but it comes in the same sort of recognizable bundle. I don't know if I make myself clear or if David has got any comments on that.
Well, I'll ask Rachel first, actually, because Rachel, this is a classic case of direct and indirect communication. I think that's exactly what the strategy is trying to adapt. So the point Bruce is making is that, you know, the risk you identified, which is what's on the table, is that, you know, our advice is not always acted upon, and sometimes there are different messages and different opportunities to get information to healthcare professionals. So how do you see this potentially working out?
Yes, thanks, Stephen. And I certainly see it's both, not one or the other. So I think there will be times when we need to communicate directly and engage directly with healthcare professionals. And there will be other times where we need to work very closely with partners, and NICE will be an important partner, but there are also many others. Just to flag that we are doing a piece of work around a healthcare professionals engagement strategy that went to Patient Safety and Engagement Committee at the beginning of April as a kind of early steering discussion, and we are planning to build on that work through a consultation over the summer so that we can have a much better understanding of how healthcare professionals want to receive information from us, what their best sources of information are. We've done that quite a lot of mapping of what's in place already so we can identify the gaps. And I think the solution is, as I say, it's not one or the other, it's both direct and indirect communication. And our plan is to bring a strategy on that back firstly to Patient Safety and Engagement Committee later this year, once we have had some engagement with that particular audience around, you know, what would work for them, what works now, and what would be better.
Okay, let's bring in David in. Obviously, as a literally practicing clinician, we can see people coming in and out of your office actually while you're on duty today. You know, engaging healthcare professionals. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I think I endorse what Bruce says. I mean, obviously, a lot of the problems that have come to MHRA relate to the actions of individual healthcare practitioners. So there's clearly room for advice, and I think it's true to say, as Bruce says, that NICE advice is what we look at for our clinical practice. I'm not sure that if a clinician received one or two bits of advice from MHRA that it thought was irrelevant, they'd ever look at another one, because we're inundated with information all the time. So I think it is really important that it's targeted. I have to say my College of Physicians in Edinburgh has been very good at putting out short notes on key messages from MHRA and putting them in a form that's useful. But of course, we need to think about orthopedic surgeons, plastic surgeons. We need to think about all the specialties and how we get to them with appropriately delivered, I think still really pretty simple advice. So yeah, I share Bruce's concern about how much of this will get through to the individual clinician without it going through their usual trusted sources.
Okay, but targeted is certainly one of the solutions, that I think is what you're saying. And Barbara, I can bring you in from a sort of a clinical point of view as well, in terms of the engagement with healthcare professionals.
Yes, now I've worked out how to unmute myself. Thanks. I'm very interested in this, very interested in the engagement with healthcare professionals. I think Rachel's quite right when she says you have to provide things that they want, but that they can access when they want them, and then they'll respect the source. And the other thing I wanted to say is engagement with what we call the general public, which isn't really the general public these days. It's a lot of communities, and some of them are more tightly knit than others. And I just want to mention a salutary lesson I had when I looked after an obviously respected elder of a family some years ago, and the family invited me to their temple for a festival celebration. And when I went, I saw revealed in front of me the whole community, very large community, all together, working together, all age groups and all styles of dignity. And I think it revealed to me that you can offer things to people and you can invite them to come and have a discourse with you, but that puts them at a disadvantage. And sometimes you have to go to the target where they feel that they're in control of the conversation and they can tell you what they really want to know and do. And I wonder whether Rachel and her team actually have started to do this and had some insight into it during COVID.
Okay. Yeah. Rachel, do you want to quickly respond to that in terms of being more proactive?
Yeah, thank you. I think you make a really good point there, Barbara, about going to people and not expecting them to always come to us. And certainly through the work on COVID vaccines, we've been working very closely with colleagues at DHSC, Public Health England in the NHS to do things like stakeholder meetings, community meetings, clearly online, which actually opens up, quite a wide range of opportunities. But certainly over the last 6 months, as the first vaccines were licensed and through this latest part of the pandemic, we've been doing a lot of community engagement on vaccines, but in partnership with others in the system rather than just ourselves, because actually that dialogue needs to be about a range of vaccine related things. It's not just the ones in the MHRA's remit. I think the second point is that as we take this strategy forward, we really need to have better mechanisms in place and better links to do that community engagement more regularly and more systematically. So we're just thinking through how we can do that. I mean, there's a lot of expertise out there with partner organisations, whether that's across the health system or places like local government, different groups, and we're looking at how best to work with them and engage in that way.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. Bruce, you got your hand up. Is that an old hand or is there something else you wanted to come back on? No. That's a no then, I take it. Michael, can I bring you in, please?
Yeah, it's just a very quick observation. Building on what Anthony said, I'm not questioning the strategy. I think the strategy is good, and I very much support it. It's just one of the subliminal messages in there, and it comes from my previous background. Public trust flows from a strong belief in independence, that the regulator acts independently in the interest of the public, and I think that's been demonstrated considerably in how the agency has responded to COVID, particularly in June's media presentations. I just don't want to lose that message when it comes to how we measure our reputation. In the strengths and benefits section of the strategy, independence seems to be just related to how parliamentarians and others, but actually I think it's wider than that. I think it's the whole public that they're confident that we are an independent regulator that makes our decisions based on evidence and objectivity. And that's the most enduring principle and value that applies to all regulators, regardless of which sector they regulate. So I wouldn't want to lose that really important message.
Yeah, and Rachel, I believe that's something that you are wanting to try and measure, aren't you, through some of the measures you're proposing? I think there's still work going on of how we do that, but that's the intent, I think.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, we had a session yesterday afternoon actually to look at the reputation index and start working out what we can do, how best to pull that forward. And Michael, it may be something that we could perhaps get you to have a look over as we develop that work.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you.
Yeah, that'd be great. Okay, one of the other components of the strategy is around internal communications and change. And I'm just wondering if I could bring in one of our executive colleagues just to maybe provide some input. Maybe Sam, if I can maybe just ask you in terms of the strategy and how this can support internal communications in the transformation programme. Is there anything you want to add in terms of your perspective?
Thanks, Stephen. I mean, this obviously internally we do need to consider how we actually get through the transformation, and there's a lot to do with culture, and I think there's a lot of interlinking strategies at the moment that we need to all pull together, because obviously different strategies create different behaviours, and therefore that impacts the culture, and this is really fundamental. And I think it also links into some of the other work that we've been talking around earlier in terms of the patient engagement and patient involvement. I mean, I think from an exec perspective, I think it's really important that we pull those strands together and ensure that this communication strategy responds to that both internally and externally, if that makes sense. So from my perspective, that's sort of where I'm seeing all the pieces come together at the moment, and really seeing this as a great opportunity for internal activity as well as external. Yeah,
okay. I think that's helpful. We shouldn't ignore that, because we've got a massive internal audience to communicate with at a time of change, just as well as we have an external audience to appeal. June, is there anything else you'd like to add to this particular strategy from what's been discussed?
Just really to endorse what Michael has said, that independence should run through us like the stick of rock. But we also have a really important expert advisory committee structure, and that it's really good to know that with our governance review, we'll be checking in on that to make sure that all the principles around conflict of interest and that incredibly important external verification of our independence is as robust as it can be. I would call it the jewel in the crown of our regulatory system, and it's the envy of many other countries. So we'll use our governance review and Carly McGurry's appointment to make absolutely sure we have that robust verification always in place, that our decisions are absolutely as they should be, evidence-based and without fear that there's been any undue influence.
Okay, I think that's helpful. So we've been asked today to approve the strategy, and in particular the 4 objectives. And if I look at page 52 of the plan, it's got a useful table. It's got the 4 objectives across the top about proactively communicating, engaging and evolving, about brand and reputation, about global leadership, and about staff communications. And then it's got the 8 key priorities that we've touched on most of those so far today in terms of patient engagement, safety communications, positioning ourselves as a global leader, healthcare professional engagement, internal communications, customer services centre, COVID-19 response, and consistently effective communications. So that's the summary of the strategy. Can I ask the board if the board's content to approve this strategy? Can I say it's a thumbs up?
Yeah,
that'd be great. Okay, Rachel, thank you very much to you and your team. I think we can therefore approve this particular strategy. Good luck with the communications, and we look forward to seeing it come into action with the tactics that Anthony mentioned. So, but thank you very much. Okay, the last item we've got on the agenda this morning is the assurance paper from the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee. Michael, you've had a couple of meetings in recent months. Can you give us a summary of your paper? You can assume we've read it, but any key highlights you want to make?
Yes, Stephen, I'll just focus on the two actions that the board delegated to us to look at, and tremendous thanks to my colleagues Barbara and Mandy for the work that they've done. The first was that you may recall that we had an internal audit review of the way in which the agency was responding to the implementation of the recommendations arising from the Cumberledge review. This gave limited assurance. This is not to say that the agency was not taking very seriously all of the recommendations. It was just a question mark over whether responsibility was clearly assigned and whether this was all being implemented in a fully integrated way. So the board asked us to look at this again. I'd like to say that we can give assurance that this has been taken very seriously. It features very much on the risk register. June, as Chief Executive, is a senior risk officer responsible for the implementation, and so we're very confident that this has been taken incredibly seriously. There's always the inevitable question about, well, what impact is it having? And we have to be realistic. Until we have more information on outcomes, you cannot say definitively that we are improving implementing fully the recommendations of the Cumberledge review, and that they're having the impact that Baroness Cumberledge clearly intended. Having said that, we are confident that the agency is doing its utmost to collect as much information as possible around outcomes, and this will continue. So we can give that level of assurance to the board. And as you and colleagues will know, this is going to feature very much on the board agenda in months to come. So members of the public can be absolutely assured that we are taking this very, very seriously. The second question or issue that you asked us to look at was, are we confident about the governance around the new medical devices regulatory framework and that risks are being managed? Again, this is very much work in progress. A lot is being done, but we would like a little bit more time to look at this in a little bit more detail. And it goes beyond just the Audit and Risk Committee. There is clearly a patient safety engagement issue here. And I'm very pleased to say that Mercy and I have been talking about this, and we now have a joint meeting of our committees scheduled for the 8th of July, where we will look at the governance in more detail and report back to the board later in the summer. The only other thing that I bring to the board's attention before I open it for questions is a feature of all our work at the last couple of meetings has been around the quality of information that the agency has to discharge its statutory functions and to add value. We recognise that our role is changing, particularly post-Brexit, as we are a standalone regulator. There's no evidence to suggest at present that the information and data that the agency has available to discharge its functions is not comprehensive, but we recognise that this is very much a fast-moving environment, and we think it would be good over the coming months to get greater assurance that the agency is responding to different opportunities to improve its information database. So again, I'm proposing a deep dive probably later in the year, in the early autumn, and I would look for the board to support that. So those are the key things. I'm happy to take any other questions on the content of the paper.
Okay, well, thank you, Michael. That's very comprehensive. Can I suggest we just do this step by step? So Paragraph 2 talks about confirming the actions that have been taken in implementing the recommendations of that internal audit on medical devices. Your recommendation is that first to be able to close that action because you've provided the assurance. Can I just check that board colleagues are content, or were there any specific questions on that issue? No, so I think we can close the action, but thank you for the assurance, Michael. In terms of the second action in paragraph 3, you're talking about holding the joint ARAC and Patient Safety Engagement Committee meeting on July the 8th, and then reporting back to the board after that. So that action should probably therefore remain open, yes, pending the joint meeting is what I've heard. Would colleagues be content with that? Because I think actually this is a really good idea where we're bringing audit and risk assurance in its broadest term and making sure that there's appropriate oversight from patient safety engagement too. So I think that's a very good proposal personally. So thank you for doing that. In terms of the other items on the paper, could I just ask a specific question around one of the items, which is on, sorry, I just find the right page. It's round about the VAT issue with CPRD. So just specifically, can I just ask very, very directly, if you don't mind, if the agency's been charging the wrong rate of VAT for 4 years and has underpaid HMRC by £1.7 million, that hadn't been picked up by management or our external auditors for that 4-year period. How assured are you that the rest of our accounts are accurate?
I am assured, and let me give my explanation. I think you have to recognise the journey on which the agency has been going, particularly in terms of the finance transformation, the transformation of the finance function that started, I think, over a year ago and is still in progress. So I think you had a situation about 3 to 4 years ago where finance operated as a cell, largely at the centre of the MHRA, and was largely very transactional based. It really didn't go beyond that. A good finance function should not be just based in the centre. It should be out there supporting and holding to account all parts of the business. And I think that's where finance are moving to now. And I think that's the reason why this discrepancy in terms of VAT was identified by finance. I think there was no way that would have happened in the way in which finance was operating 3 to 4 years ago. So as long as that journey continues and that the business feels supported and held to account by the finance function, I gain that greater assurance. I think we talked separately, Stephen, about should external audit have picked this up. And I think it's quite an interesting question. I think the classic response from external audit is probably likely to be that, well, this is not material by value. But actually, I would say it was material by context. We are an organisation that was a trading fund. VAT is an important element of this. So I am going to actually be asking external audit to give me a bit more of an explanation as to should they have identified this or should they have looked at some of the controls in this place in the past. But, I am very happy to, as chair of ARAC, to give assurance that, this was not picked up. This was picked up by finance operating in a much more professional way than it has in the past. And I think that's all credit to Boriana and her colleagues.
Okay, well thanks. And I'll bring John in actually, because obviously the good news is the new finance organisation has identified the issue and you've clearly, you've corrected it now, John. Can you maybe just give us some brief detail of the controls that you've now put in place to avoid this happening again?
Yeah, happy to, Stephen. I mean, just building on Michael's point. So, I mean, this dates back to 2014 and in essence is a misunderstanding of how VAT works, which is VAT is charged on the nature of the supply, not dependent on the receiving organisation, if you like. Yeah. So, the amount is really a product of the fact that it's been running for sort of 6 or 7 years. CPRD as a whole is less than 10% of the agency's total income, and the educational component of which this relates to is a small subset of that. So that addresses Michael's materiality point. In terms of the controls going forward, as you highlighted, we have transformed the finance function. We now have a dedicated tax resource in-house who has looked at the other areas within CPRD and also actually in NIBS and areas where we are charging VAT on services. And we're comfortable that we don't have any other issues. And actually that resource also has the ability to draw on the Government Shared Services Tax Centre of Excellence for wider advice. So I think we've upped, if you like, the capability within the function. And as Michael points out, it was actually identified through our processes anyway. So you can never say never, but I think the risk is significantly reduced.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. The reason I just wanted to pick on that today was purely we're going to be asked to approve the annual accounts at the next meeting, and so I want us to be able to be assured that we've got solid processes. I think it goes to show that we need to have centralised one agency processes across the organisation with sort of in-depth business partners working with local teams where it's required, and that's very much the model that is now in place. So certainly I'm much more assured than I was when I first became aware of the issue. So thank you for that, I appreciate it. Sorry to hog the questions there. Was there anything else that anybody else wanted to ask as far as Michael's assurance report was concerned? Okay, so Michael will note the report with thanks, particularly for the assurance you provided on one of the questions that the board set you, and we look forward to getting feedback in the July meeting with your joint meeting with the Patient Safety Engagement Committee on the information sources. That would be great. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the formal part of the agenda, as it were, in terms of the standard topics. We've now got an opportunity for the next half an hour or so to ask some questions from members of the public. So Rachel, do you want to tell us what the first question is?
Yeah, sure. And thanks to everyone who's pre-submitted questions or sent them through in the chat. We've got quite a lot this morning. So I've trying to group them into different areas. So I thought we would start off with COVID vaccines. And the first question is asking what the justification is for giving children the COVID vaccine. The questioner is saying the children are almost invariably unaffected by COVID, and through vaccination they will be given a newly invented experimental gene therapy.
Okay, June, do you want to pick that one up, please?
Well, thank you for this question, and perhaps I can start with a little bit of clarification. None of the COVID vaccines in use in the UK being deployed are authorised for use in children, and that means at this point under 16 years of age. And you're quite right that children are usually very resilient and largely unaffected, but there are children, because of their perhaps underlying illnesses or long-term problems, who can be quite seriously affected. And so our green book that gives advice on how the vaccine should be used does talk about how children, particularly those who are being cared for perhaps in an institutional setting and maybe with neurodisabilities, long-term and serious problems that they won't get better from, and maybe if they tend to get recurrent chest infections, that they would justify being vaccinated. And therefore we've made sure that there's permission in the way we've approved the vaccines for those children. And as we do that, we always monitor safety and we collect information all the time about the way the vaccine is being used. When it comes to the particular question about deciding to give children a vaccine, that's really more for the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, if and when one is approved. So Stephen, I hope that helps clarify the situation and make clear that at the moment there isn't a general decision, except there is permission for those children who've got other illnesses, if they particularly are prone to chest infections. It's the best way to look after them. So I'll stop there and hand back to you.
Okay, thank you. And Christine, could you maybe just add a little bit more colour in terms of gene therapies and the use of those in children?
Thanks. Thank you. You pick up an important point, Stephen, because none of these are gene therapies and none of these are experimental. So experimental would mean that something is in a clinical trial and hasn't been sufficiently tested yet. And obviously all vaccines are authorized, have been tested in large clinical trials and have been given to millions of people. So you can't really call them experimental. And these are not gene therapies. None of the vaccines can in any way change the genome of our cells. They're basically very simple blueprints that you put into the factory so that the factory, just on a very transient basis, produces something else as it normally does, and then it wanes off again. So a blueprint cannot change the machines in the factory. So this is impossible from a scientific perspective. So these are not gene therapies. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for that. So the next question I'd like to ask is from Dr. Val Tate. So Val, thank you very much for joining us today. I can see your picture on the screen. Would you just mind just saying what your affiliation is, and then please ask the board your question.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to the board. Just may I say, it's the first time I've ever done this, and I've been hugely impressed by listening to the conversation, and also by the focus that you have on communication and on public engagement and patient engagement. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
My affiliation, I was a research scientist for a long time and worked in the biotech industry for the latter part of my career in communications. I now retired technically, but have been doing PPI work with the University of Oxford.
Okay.
So my question, it's about COVID-19 diagnostics, and particularly about the lateral flow tests which have been introduced. Their use has sparked a huge amount of controversy about their accuracy and about the meaning of sensitivity and specificity, and particularly with the researchers and the opinion leaders who are openly disagreeing about are they fit for purpose effectively. So in the light of lessons that have been learned during the pandemic, what changes will the board make to the diagnostic test approval criteria and processes to rebuild public trust and confidence in the validity and usefulness of these tests? Thank you.
Well, that's a really good question. June, would you like to kick us off on that, please?
Well, thank you, Dr. Tate, and really appreciate your comments and feedback too. What changes will we make to the diagnostic test approval criteria and processes to build or rebuild public trust? Really important at this phase in the pandemic, as we all know. And just a couple of words about what we do, because we don't routinely approve medical devices. That's not part of our day-to-day role, given the regulatory framework for devices. We can give an emergency use authorization, and what we've done to help improve standards for tests is issue target product profiles, and that's been a really important step during the pandemic. And we have a target product profile for a self-use lateral flow test, which is in development, and it will be published in due course. But they're not mandatory, these. So let me come on to what we do. We're close partners of the NHS Test and Trace. And our mantra, of course, is regulation follows science. And so we work with the National Testing Programme to make sure that there are data which we and Public Health England can look at to support the tests. And this is something that's very much an inbuilt, ongoing. We have a member of staff who's part-time with the Test and Trace team, and we meet twice a week. So the regulatory rigor is there so that we can give the assurance that the tests that are part of the national programme have been rigorously looked at, and that confidence should be there. But very interested that you should raise that question, and we've talked already in this meeting about how the regulatory framework for medical devices will evolve. So we've learned a huge amount. We are there at the table when the decisions are being made, and we ensure that data are available to support those decisions. So I'll stop there, Stephen, and particularly if Dr. Tate would like to have a longer dialogue, I'm sure we can get that input through our devices colleagues as well.
So Dr. Tate, does that answer your question, or would you like a follow-up?
It partly answers my question, yes. It is this issue about what happens out there on social media, and you've been talking about communication and what happens when information gets out into the public domain, and then a lot of people add their own two pennyworth, so to speak, and then it's very hard for the general public to know what to believe. And I was listening to what you're talking about with your communication strategy, and that all sounds very laudable. And I also appreciate that you probably don't have the control that you would like once information gets out there and once these discussions get going. But in a way, would you wade into some of these discussions? How maybe that's a question to Rachel. How would you respond? Is it appropriate for the MHRA?
So I think what you're saying is, if we see clearly incorrect information, would we intervene? So Rachel, do you want to not only be the question asker, but can you be the answerer this time?
Yeah, of course. So absolutely, yes. I mean, we monitor social media, as do our colleagues at DHSC Comms and the Test and Trace Comms team. And if there are instances of inaccurate or false information, we would work together to correct that. Sometimes it will be led by the Test and Trace team, because quite often it's in their, it's the use of tests in their remit. Sometimes it's us, sometimes it's others, but we very much, where we can, pick up on misinformation, get it corrected. And you'll also have seen quite a lot of spokespeople out and about on social media, short videos and so on, talking about vaccines, tests and so forth. And that is all about trying to get accurate information on social media rather than, some of the inaccurate material that's out there. But it's a continual effort, because obviously, social media is huge. And so we need to target our resources on the parts that are getting the most traction if they're inaccurate.
Yeah. And I think that also overlaps into some of our enforcement activities. And so, Sam, do you want to add some other context just for Dr. Tate?
Thanks very much, and thanks, Dr. Tate, for your questions. I guess I just wanted to comment and just talk about the sort of educational role that we also play. I mean, both in terms of trying to put out, as Rachel alluded to, some videos and things like that, which sort of give a bit of context and the clarity around some of the work that we do. But then there's also the other side, which is what June touched on, which was things like the target product profiles, which they're not regulatory requirements. I mean, they're there as to guide and help the companies who are designing some of these products to make sure that they come to market in a safe way. So there's a couple of elements there in terms of that educational piece, which is really important. And again, as June alluded to, the regulatory framework going forwards, albeit it's got to come to fruition, will also look to improve some of these areas too. So I think there's a lot of work ongoing in this space, Dr. Tate, and I think we will see those improvements come through. Okay.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to ask your question and for giving your permission today to be online. So appreciate it. Thank you very much. If we can maybe move on to another question, Rachel, could you ask the next one?
Yes, I was going to move on to another vaccine-related question, actually, that's come in this morning. So this is a follow-up to June's Chief Exec's report from the beginning of the meeting, where June mentioned that the one-dose Janssen vaccine would be coming online imminently. And the questioner is saying, we know that the company is having a lot of issues with supply, with only about 5% of the supplies planned so far delivered to the EU. Are you expecting supplies of this Janssen vaccine to be immediately available as soon as it's approved?
So, June, do you want to make a comment about that and probably clarify our role in terms of supply, or we don't have a role in supply?
Yes, absolutely. The regulatory authority has those two roles, one of which clearly is to thoroughly and rigorously review the evidence of safety, of effectiveness, and of quality, and also to get ready as every batch comes through to be testing its potency and its purity. Is it strong enough to give the response that you want, and is it pure to go into people? So that's our role. In terms of the decisions around supply and deployment, they really are outside the agency's remit, although of course we liaise closely so that everyone knows the stage of our regulatory readiness. So today, not possible to give really any comments on what the supply situation will be, but really to assure that we're at the ready here, particularly now that NIBS is ready to do that testing of all the batches. Okay, I think that's an example of just clarifying our role. Clearly, we're part of a much more wider system, and we're doing our part, but the supply is a different question. Okay, we're joined now by Eliza Slaughter. So Eliza, thank you very much for joining us and for submitting your pre-submitted question and for giving your permission to be on video today. Would you just like to mention your affiliation and then ask your question?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Eliza. I'm a reporter from APM Health Europe, which is a pharma industry newswire. So my question is about the pilot scheme for increased patient participation when companies are submitting applications for new drugs. I'd just like to know a bit more about what insight has been gained so far from the pilot and whether it's likely to be implemented full-time anytime soon, and also why it's so important that companies let regulators know about patient involvement in trials and how it helps regulators make informed decisions on improving drugs. And I think Samantha said it's around half a dozen companies so far that have participated. I wasn't sure if that was just for medical devices, but yeah, I'd just like to know a bit more around how the pilot's going and sort of what direction you think it might end up in.
That's a great question, actually. So Sam, do you want to start, please?
Absolutely, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Eliza, for your question. A really, really good question, and we have touched on it a little bit this morning, but let me give a little bit more. So far, you're right, we've got around half a dozen companies we've engaged with from a medicines point of view. So that's at the marketing authorization step. So when they submit their application, we engage with them and see what they want to participate in this activity where we're gathering information on how they're engaging with patients, whether they've already conducted that engagement, and how that's also impacted the development programme. So we're really trying to understand the efforts that the companies are putting in. And as I said earlier, then there's actually quite a lot of work ongoing by the companies in terms of that patient engagement. It's just that we're not necessarily seeing that through the routine approaches that we have now, which is why we want to improve that so we get a much better understanding. We also have a similar piece of activity ongoing under another pilot with our clinical trial unit, and they're also engaging with industry and academia and the like, but it's more looking at when the applications come in, having a little bit of a sense check about what's going on in terms of that patient engagement. And I think we've looked at probably in the region of maybe 10 or 20 clinical trial applications that have come in. The number's still growing. Like I say, it's only been out there since around the 23rd of March. I think the publication went up. But it's like I say, this proactive approach to just engage the stakeholders that we're working with in this area. We're going to go through I guess a period of time while this will continue to run. I think we're expecting it to run through into the summer because we want to get enough data to give us that information. We'll then go through a bit of a period of analysis, I would say, to really understand where the gaps are and look at perhaps the lessons we might be able to learn from that. But going forwards, the ambition, I guess, would be to consistently ask companies about their patient engagement. But it might naturally, and what I didn't mention earlier was this might naturally be almost overtaken by some of the innovative licensing and access pathway, the ILAP pathway that we've got in place, because that's driving through patient engagement and involvement. And indeed, it's completely embedded within that new pathway. So within the ILAP pathway, we have a patient reference group, which has just recently been set up. That has around 16 members so far. And this particular patient reference group, again, is part of a bit of a pilot to make sure that this works for the ILAP process. We're testing out and trialing it. We are wanting that reference group to contribute to the innovation passport decisions, which the steering committee consider. So at the moment, for that reference group, we're working out the terms of reference, sorting out the process, working out how the engagement can work within the steering committee to enable that whole process to happen. So it won't be too long before we have a number of representatives from that reference group rotating into the steering committee to help with those decisions. So that I think to an extent may also run in parallel and could actually overtake some of the other pilot work. And I guess the other area for the patient reference group is actually the target development profile. So this is the next step of the ILAP pathway to get them involved in that as well. So that's the work in progress too. So I think there's quite a lot going on in that whole area. And then from the devices perspective, we also have something similar where we're asking applicants for evidence of patient involvement activities throughout the development of the devices and their studies. So during this pilot, the information provided by the applicants, as I said earlier, will be voluntary. It won't alter the outcome of their application, much like the medicines activity. It won't impact decisions at this stage. It's just an information gathering to really give us that greater level of understanding so that we can put in place much more robust systems going forwards. So I hope that sort of gives you a flavour of what we're doing, Eliza.
So I think it's a very live issue, Eliza. I think we're clearly piloting a number of different approaches, but there's a very clear intent from the agency to have systematic involvement of patients at every stage of the life cycle of the development of the product. And I think that will be how I would summarise our ambition, if that works for you. So, okay, thank you very much for your question. I really appreciate it today. So, Rachel, I'm just conscious of time, and I know we've got a lot of questions. So could I maybe ask my agency colleagues to, let's have a quick fire round. So can we have quick answers, please, to try and make sure we get through all the questions? Otherwise, we'll be left with a load of people hanging on, if that's okay. So, Rachel.
Yeah, thank you. So just following on, there are some other questions around patient involvement. So I thought if we took those now. So the first one, medical charities like the Alzheimer's Society have refined their patient and public involvement and engagement to a high degree. Is this something you'll look at as regard to accessing participants for public engagement?
Okay, June, can you pick that one up? Is that an area of interest?
Yes, we will. And the consultation that's about to start, I hope will light the fires, and we'll be back in touch with people to pick up their, I hope, offers of good information and advice and maybe even participation.
Yeah, okay, no, that's good. Thank you. Rachel, next one.
Okay, the next one. Many patient advocates feel victimised by a system that doesn't want to listen to them. What encouragement can you offer them?
That's concerning. There's that feeling. June, I'm sure you'd share your concern on that.
We certainly understand what you're saying, and we intend to do things on a number of levels. Please look out for the consultation on how we engage and involve people. I hope today you've heard how with Patient Safety Connect, we'll have a responsive system, and with our communication strategy, we'll have a dialogue. But the powerful information you share with us is vital to our robust decisions. So please help us turn the corner, because we want to turn it.
Yeah, and maybe I could just bring Mercy into the conversation, actually, because obviously this is, I know, a clear area of interest of yours as well.
Yeah, it's really important that people continue to speak up and engage with us. And one of the key things of my committee is to make sure that the agency is listening. So yes, very, very much encouraging kind of that involvement with us. Don't give up just yet. keep going, because the agency is changing and really trying to hear from all voices and those concerns.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much, Mercy. Rachel, next one.
The next question is quite long, but I'll summarise, and it does build on the point that Mercy has just made. So the questioner is saying it's really important for victims to get face-to-face contact with the MHRA. So could we set up regular meetings for the MHRA to meet with patient safety groups to really engage with them, give patients a voice and the opportunity to share their story?
June, I think this is something we already do, actually.
We are planning to do more systematically, and I think that's the questioner's concern. Clearly, we're coming up to a very important time point with the isotretinoin expert working group. I mentioned earlier we met with the patient reference group of the Cumberledge review, and that was very illuminating indeed. And therefore, going forward, we need to pick up the ideas and what we've learned. The patient reference group from Cumberledge said, will you have webinars? So these are areas where paradoxically, at the moment in lockdown, we can do more easily. So leave it with us, and we are thinking particularly through the consultation, how we can do more in terms of face-to-face. But we agree there are some areas where only face-to-face will help us fully understand the impact on patients. So thank you for asking.
And maybe this is a good example, Rachel, of where our strategy for two-way communication, we could maybe feedback more broadly that we've actually had some of these, direct interactions, not with individual people, but at an anonymized level, but to show that there is that type of two-way dialogue ongoing.
Indeed. Thank you.
Okay, next question, please.
Okay, so the next one picks up a point made at the last board meeting, actually, around reporting. And the questioner is saying, it was said at the last meeting that every death that's reported to the MHRA is fully investigated. Can you say a bit more about that? I think that would be through the yellow card scheme, potentially.
Okay. June, anything else you could add to that?
Every report that comes in through yellow card that has a fatal outcome is fully investigated through contacts with health professionals, coroners as appropriate, post-mortem details. And these are the reports that deserve every possible care and attention, and that is what they get.
Okay, thank you. Rachel?
And turning to patient stories, we have a questioner saying if they send patient stories in, how are they going to be used, and when do you propose using this type of evidence? It's not about a specific product, but it's about capturing and using patient stories and how that will happen.
That probably relates to the conversation we had earlier in terms of using examples to demonstrate how we're operating, I think. So June, is it something you could add to that?
Definitely. We truly value the experiences that patients share with us. They tell us much more sometimes than very factual information from a busy health professional, how a medicine or a medical device may have affected quality of life or even ability to undertake the things that make your life good. We undertook a very important review through a health technology funding on how patient reports add value and the enrichment of signals that we detect through these other, perhaps more statistical or factual means. And that was Tony Avery's report. If you're interested, please glance at that, because it has been our go-to reference, and that all our staff know that what we learn from patient experiences and how we capture them through links with our yellow card scheme truly enhance our ability to understand the risks. It isn't just quantity, it's qualitative information that is really important. And I have personally learned much more from patient experiences than from any algorithm. So that's the commitment we have here, to use that in a way that benefits everyone.
And I think actually using them internally as well to demonstrate how we need to improve our processes is valuable insight. So I think there's an important role in internal communications to help to improve our internal processes. Okay, Rachel, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So turning to medicines regulation, there is a question that asks, is it harder to regulate and enforce medicines restrictions once a medicine goes onto the market?
So you say the question again.
Yeah. Is it harder to regulate and enforce medicine restrictions once a medicine goes onto the market?
Okay, June, you've got a lot of experience in this area. I might come to Sam next.
Yes, how we enforce the regulatory powers that we have clearly is through law, it's through evidence, and it's through our ability to influence healthcare risk management. based on information that we provide. And that is there right throughout the life cycle, from a clinical trial to a very mature medicine. And sometimes we pick up issues with a medicine that's been available for many years, as some colleagues will know on the line here. So the powers are there. The evidence base may differ scientifically and in the amount and nature of the evidence. And it's the skills of our expert assessors and their ability to use other data sources like the clinical practice research data link and all other available data, perhaps in the published literature, perhaps even different data sources worldwide, that makes sure that we have an evidence base throughout the product life cycle. There are challenges, as I think everyone knows, when a medicine or a medical device becomes embedded in clinical use. Changing behavior can be different from when a new product is available and that behavior is there to be created, usually with the help from NICE. So the powers are there, the regulatory framework is there, and it is our commitment to make sure that we have the evidence and we have it in a timely way. But as you've heard from previous discussions today, we're doing everything we can to make sure that evidence base is as available, as robust, and as timely as we need. So we have powers, we have a commitment to evidence, and we also, through our partnerships, have an absolute cast iron commitment to work hand in hand with bodies that influence clinical behaviour. I hope that helps a bit.
Yeah, thank you, June. And maybe Sam, you know, obviously, I think June's covered the regulatory component to that, but there's also a strong enforcement activity that the agency is involved in. Is there an example or two you could maybe give on that?
Thanks, Chair. I mean, it's probably worth covering off both the sort of compliance angle and the enforcement bit, actually, because obviously through the compliance area, making sure that people meet all of those restrictions, or more to the point, requirements of the legislation and the guidance that we put out. We obviously have a very fulsome inspectorate which covers all areas of the product life cycle, you know, all the way from GLP, or good lab practice, which is the non-clinical, through to clinical and manufacturing and distribution and the like, and pharmacovigilance even. So the whole product life cycle is covered by a team of inspectors that goes out to ensure that the regulations are being met. So that's one area. The other thing obviously is the enforcement activity. Most of that is probably post-market, although we do see things earlier on as well. The reason behind that is because obviously once you have a product, it's more easy to imitate something that's there than something that's not. But overall, we have a very robust system in place, and a very secure global supply chain, which we monitor, and we work with our international partners to ensure that is maintained. So have excellent relationships with other regulatory bodies and other enforcement bodies around the globe to really ensure that. So I don't think it's necessarily about being harder once the medicine's on the market. I think it's just a different approach that's required, that's all. But like I say, a robust system in place that should provide confidence. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. That's really helpful, actually. So, okay, Rachel, another question, please.
Okay, so this question is about trial design, and I think it follows on from the earlier discussion which Christian led earlier. So the question is about multi-site trials and what the public should make when they hear that one site's ethics committee approval might be easier to gain than another site. So therefore the principal investigator goes to the one where it's easiest to get ethics committee approval. Wonder if there's a comment on that.
Okay. Christian, do you want to add a comment on that?
Thanks. Well, not sure it can be easier than others, because they all have to follow standard operating procedures that they are setting up, and they're all regulated, not by the MHRA. I should say there's obviously an intentional independence. So they are approved by the UK Ethics Committee Authority, and they all have to adhere to strict standards. So what you could say is that maybe some ethical committees or ethics committees are more familiar with certain compounds and with certain trial designs. So that may be an explanation why an approval might be faster.
Okay. So we all operate to the same standards, I think, is what you're saying, Christian, in particular.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Rachel. Another question, please.
Okay, so we've then got some questions on a product called isotretinoin, which has been an area that the board's had questions on before, and there's three broadly similar questions, so I will pull them together into one, and it is asking for an update on the work of the expert working group on isotretinoin. One question said that they've only had one meeting, so how can they act quickly if serious concerns come to light? Another questioner was asking about the consultation responses to that public consultation, asking whether for people like this particular person's children it was a miracle drug, but they're wondering what's happened to the results of the consultation. And then the third question again is asking about that consultation and working group, and when patient groups might meet with the experts to share their knowledge and understanding. So I think the three of them taken together are a request for a general update on progress with that expert working group and particularly the consultation.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. June, can I come to you on that? Because obviously there's a number of important points there.
Yes, it is a good time for a general update. The expert working group has in fact met 3 times, twice last year in March and September and May this year. And in terms of the real outcomes of the consultation, really it has been a tremendous response, with people sharing a real breadth of experiences and perspectives, and a broad range of stakeholders too. So this is what resulted in the isotretinoin expert working group members asking for a further meeting to intensively explore that evidence before moving on to have a direct engagement with patients and families. And that will be in July. And that will be on the basis that the expert group members now have a really good and detailed understanding of everything that has been contributed during the consultation, including perspectives of efficacy, as well as various safety issues, which we know have concerned people so deeply. So there is a breadth there. The group is setting itself the appropriate challenge of really understanding everything that's been contributed before that direct interaction that will happen in July. And then after that, we will be meeting further. I think I've got a note here in the early autumn. So Rachel, if you are content, I think we should put an update on our webpage so that everybody's got the exact details. I don't happen to have dates today, but I think we can do that. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, certainly, and happy to work with the team on that update, June.
Yeah, and Natalie, if you could just record that as an action, please. I think that will be helpful to close the loop on that. Rachel, I'm just conscious of time. How many questions have you got left?
So there's one final one, which is more of a comment, but I thought colleagues might want to respond to it. It's about safety in low and middle income countries, such as Ghana, where the weekly review of real world data and real-time safety review that June mentioned in her report wouldn't have happened without the MHRA working with those countries. First time that the countries could look at their own safety data collectively. And the comment is about the MHRA continuing to play a strategic role as a global regulator. Work in progress, but the start of a breakthrough. So I thought colleagues might like to comment on that work and how that's going to be developed.
Okay. June, do you want to have an initial comment on that?
We are going to be taking an in-depth look at our international strategies, as you mentioned, Stephen, but central to this concept is that we have systems and expertise, and Sam has mentioned this too, that can be so helpful in giving that leg up or even leapfrog to countries that don't have to reinvent. They can stand on our shoulders, as it were, if this is the way they hope to operate systems. Our app that John Quinn mentioned has been syndicated by the WHO. It's in French in Burkina Faso and Côte d'Ivoire, so we can give that, if you like, why reinvent the wheel if it's good enough for you? There might be other countries that want to use a different mechanism, and that's absolutely fine too. So particularly now when that leg up is needed, so that local decisions can be made. And that's that local ownership and sense that the public can rely on their health leaders to give good and robust advice. What I've learned, particularly from signal detection with Ghana, is that the signals that matter there may be different from the ones that we're looking at. And therefore, there is a two-way benefit indeed from that dialogue. But it's a key element of our international strategy. Really looking forward to coming back to the board next month to really get our teeth into it. How we can move forward from here with our systems, with our processes, and with our in-house knowledge that actually enables others. So it'd be the full meaning of an enabling regulator. Thank you.
Well, thank you, June. And I think actually that just demonstrates yet again the agency is determined to be outward facing. We want to maintain our global position in health, and we're going to play our part in that, absolutely. So I think we're going to have to call that done. It's now 10 to 1, which is the end time for the meeting. So I'd just like to thank everyone who's asked questions. I really do appreciate the dialogue. It's all part of our strategies we've talked about today. I'm looking forward to continuing this dialogue at our next meeting. It's in 4 weeks' time, on Tuesday, the 15th of June at 10 o'clock. And in the meantime, the agency will continue to put patients first, will continue to facilitate innovation, will ensure patient safety, and will continue to enable healthcare access. So on that happy note, I'll thank you for your time today and wish you a very good rest of the day. So thank you very much. Bye-bye for now.